Story 1. I didn't come to Olympic National Park to be found. I came to disappear for a while. There's something about the way the trees tower here. Not just tall, but ancient. Like they've been waiting longer than I've been alive. Waiting for what? I didn't know. But I needed that kind of quiet. I needed something old, something still, something untouched by the noise I'd been dragging behind me for years. It was early October when I rolled into the park in my faded white RV, the one I'd half converted myself, patched together with more hope than skill. My name's Joel. I was 38 then, a guy from Utah who never quite figured out how to stop running from ghosts that never showed up in mirrors. My divorce was 2 years behind me, but the silence left in its wake was louder than any argument we'd ever had. My father had passed that spring, and I hadn't gone to the funeral. I told myself it was because I didn't believe in empty gestures. But the truth was, I just couldn't look at that casket and feel nothing, and still call myself a son. So I ran. Olympic National Park was supposed to be the last stop on a long, meandering trip through the Pacific Northwest. I'd told myself I was going to write, maybe photograph the places I camped, but I hadn't done much of either. Just drove, just sat, just stared. I parked in a secluded site near the Hoh rainforest, the kind of place that felt like it had grown wild for centuries without anyone ever asking it to, moss draped from branches like the trees were exhaling. Ferns blanketed the forest floor so thick they looked like waves of green velvet frozen in place. I barely had a cell signal, and that was by design. I was the only one in that part of the campground. It was shoulder season. Most of the summer traffic had vanished. Rangers did their rounds in the morning and evening, but for the most part, I was alone. And that first night, it felt perfect, like the park had stretched its limbs just wide enough to let me rest inside. But sometime past midnight, I woke up, not to a noise exactly. It was quieter than noise. Something underneath the silence. A shift in the stillness that I felt more than heard, the kind of thing that prickles under your skin without ever touching you. I sat up in the RV, still half asleep, listening. I cracked the window near my bed, expecting wind or maybe an animal scuffling through the underbrush. Instead, I heard what sounded like whispering, faint, in and out, like voices carried on wind that didn't move the trees. I held my breath, listened harder. Thought maybe it was just the sound of water somewhere, flowing over rocks, distorted by the walls of the forest. But then I heard it again. Not words, not yet. Just the shape of language. Like the forest was mumbling to itself. I shut the window, shook it off, told myself I'd been dreaming. That sometimes when you wake between REM and reality, the mind finishes whatever dream you were in with whatever sounds it can pull from memory. I lay back down and stared at the roof of the RV until morning light bled through the blinds. The next day I hiked, deep into the Hoh, miles in. I didn't take the main trail. I followed a narrow offshoot path that looked barely used. That's what I wanted, to feel like the only human for miles. And I did. The quiet here was different than the desert or the plains. It wasn't a lack of sound. It was a fullness, a saturation. Like the forest wasn't empty, but listening. I stayed out longer than I should have, made it back to the RV near dusk. Still no one else in the campground, still no signal, just the groan of trees in the wind and the rustle of leaves settling into the cool of night. That second night, I didn't sleep. The whispering came back, stronger this time, closer. And it wasn't just noise, it was words. Faint at first, indistinct, but real and rhythmic, almost like chanting. Then one of them said it. I swear to God it said my name. Not once, not shouted, just woven into the hush. Joel. So soft I thought I imagined it, but then I heard it again. A different voice, farther away but clearer. Joel. I froze. Sat up in bed, my heart hammering so loud it drowned the second part of what I heard. Joel, come out. I didn't move. My mouth dried out in an instant, and all I could think was, this is how people disappear in places like this. I opened the window slowly, like maybe the whisper had come from just outside. Maybe someone was pulling a prank. Maybe I wasn't alone in the campground after all. but the darkness outside was thicker than night should have been. My flashlight barely cut into it. The beam just bounced off trunks and branches as if the trees were swallowing the light. "Hello?" I called out, my voice thinner than I expected. Nothing answered. I stayed up the rest of the night, sitting at the little table inside the RV, the stove ticking from where I'd made tea but never drank it. Every so often I thought I heard something again. Not always my name, sometimes laughter, sometimes just breath. When the sun came up, I packed my things. My hands were shaking. I didn't even eat. I just started the engine and drove back down the gravel road toward the park exit. But here's where it gets worse. I never left the forest. I should have hit the main road within 20 minutes. I know I should have. I'd tracked it the day before. I wasn't far from it. The trailhead where I'd parked was barely a loop off the highway. But no matter how far I drove, no matter which way I turned, the trees never ended. I watched the GPS sputter and die. The roads I thought I recognized bent in ways they hadn't before. I circled back past a marker I was sure I'd passed an hour earlier. The trees looked the same. Not just similar, the same, like they weren't just growing around me but closing in. I pulled over, killed the engine, stepped out into the quiet. The air was colder. Still, my breath hung in front of me even though it hadn't been that cold earlier. And then I heard it again. A whisper. This time, not from far away, right behind me. "Joel." I spun around. No one. But the trees swayed in opposite directions, like something invisible had just moved through them. My heart thudded so hard I had to lean against the hood of the RV just to keep from falling. I should have been terrified. I should have been running. But a strange calm came over me, not peaceful, paralyzed, like something wanted me still. And in that stillness, the forest spoke again, this time in chorus. My name whispered from 100 different directions at once. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been 5 seconds, could have been 10 minutes. All I remember is the stillness. The trees didn't move in the wind. They moved in response to something, to me. I got back in the RV, slammed the door, and locked it, as if a lock would stop whatever was out there. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely turn the key in the ignition. But the engine roared to life like it wanted to leave even more than I did. I took the next turn I saw, gravel crunching under tires, tree limbs scraping the top of the roof. It felt like driving through a throat. Everything narrowing, everything closing. The road curved hard and steep, and for a second I thought I'd gone off course again. But finally, I saw something that didn't belong to the forest. A sign. Soul Duck Primitive Site, 1.3 miles. It wasn't the exit, but it was something. I followed the road toward it like it was the last buoy before the ocean pulled me under. The primitive site was empty, just a few raised clearings with fire pits, no hookups. It wasn't maintained this late in the season. I pulled into the farthest spot from the road, turned off the RV, and sat. Just sat. I needed to believe I was out of it, out of whatever pocket I'd driven into. That maybe I'd had some kind of waking nightmare. Dehydration, sleep deprivation, the works. That the woods hadn't whispered my name. That I'd never felt them move. That I hadn't felt watched since the moment I entered the hoe. I stepped outside again, careful this time. The air here felt normal. The kind of cold you expect in the Pacific Northwest in fall. Birds called in the distance. A squirrel darted across the road. I even smelled wood smoke from some distant fire. I breathed, told myself it was over, but I couldn't shake the sense that the forest had let me leave, like it had wanted me to go somewhere else. The rest of the day passed without incident. I kept expecting to hear something, a twig snapping, a voice on the wind, but there was only the steady rhythm of the woods. I made a fire, cooked some beans, wrote in my journal for the first time in weeks. I even slept a little that night. But the peace didn't last, because around 2:30 a.m. I woke again, and this time it wasn't the whispers that stirred me. It was tapping, light, deliberate tapping on the side of the RV. Not wind, not branches, knuckles. I held my breath and didn't move. The sound came in tap, tap, pause, tap. It moved from one side of the RV to the other. A slow circle, like someone or something was walking around it, inspecting. I reached for the hatchet I kept by the door and gripped the handle so tight my knuckles went white. Then it stopped. Silence. A minute passed, then 2. I exhaled slowly, every muscle in my body clenched. The tap didn't come again, but something worse did. A whisper, right outside the door, so close I could hear the warmth behind the breath. "Joel, you're not lost." I lunged, threw open the door with the hatchet raised, but there was no one there. Nothing. Just trees. Silent and still. And I swear on every breath I've ever taken, that one of them was closer than it had been the night before. A cedar with a twist in its trunk like a corkscrew, now only a few feet from the RV's front bumper. I would have remembered it. It wasn't there when I parked. The forest doesn't grow that fast. I shut the door and locked it again. Sat in the driver's seat until dawn with the hatchet in my lap. Every few minutes I'd glance at the twisted cedar. It never moved, but it never felt still either. The next day I left that site, drove farther west, closer to the coast. I kept thinking maybe if I could just get near the ocean, the forest would stop following me, because that's what it felt like now. Not that I was in it, but that it was following me. I found a small, privately run campground near Forks, one of those quiet pull-through sites with faded picnic tables and coin showers that hadn't worked since 2014. The woman at the check-in desk looked like she hadn't had a customer in a week. When I asked her how full the campground was, she said I was the only one there. I asked if that was normal for this time of year. She looked at me a little too long and just said, "It is now." That night, I parked under a street lamp near the bathhouse, kept all the blinds down, locked every door, but it didn't matter. I woke up to the sound of trees again. Not whispering this time. Breathing, the sound of wind through needles and leaves. But it wasn't outside. It was inside the RV. I turned on the light. There was nothing. No windows open. No doors unlocked. But the air moved. I could feel it on the back of my neck, soft and warm, like exhale. Then something whispered from inside the wall. "Joel." I jumped back, hatchet raised, scanning every corner. There was nothing to see. But the walls, the condensation on the windows had a pattern now. Spirals, circles, like something had pressed into them from the outside or the inside while I slept. I snapped a photo with my phone, hand shaking so bad it came out blurry. The whisper came again, this time clearer, more insistent. "You're not lost. You're chosen." And then silence. The word stuck in my brain like a thorn. Chosen. It repeated itself over and over that morning as I tried to shake sleep off like a fever dream. "You're not lost. You're chosen." I left that site at dawn without looking back. No coffee. No food. I didn't even clean the windshield. Just drove with dried condensation smearing the glass and spirals fading in the rising light. I drove until I hit a gas station just outside Port Angeles. Civilization. People. Bright lights and dull conversations. The first guy I saw at the pump wore a Seahawks hoodie and nodded at me like nothing in the world was wrong. It felt surreal, like I'd crossed a line and stepped back into reality, but left something of myself behind. In the bathroom, I stared at my face in the mirror. I looked aged. My eyes were bloodshot, skin pale. My cheeks were hollow like I'd been sick. I splashed water on my face and leaned in closer, and that's when I saw it. Behind me, just for a second, not a reflection. A shadow, tall, long, thin. It moved behind me in the mirror, but when I turned, nothing was there. I left the gas station fast. Didn't fill up, didn't eat. Just got in the RV and drove south along 101, away from the coast, away from the forest, away from anything that reminded me of cedar or fir or the wet, rotting smell of moss and soil. I made it as far as Lake Quinault before the check engine light came on. I swore out loud, hit the steering wheel, pulled off at a turnout by the lake. The engine coughed, wheezed, then went dead. Just like that, silence again. And not the peaceful kind, the kind that leans. I stepped out of the RV, slammed the door behind me, and stared across the gray water. Mist curled over the surface. Trees leaned in from every direction, as if watching. and that smell, that old, wet, earthy scent, returned in force. It was then that I realized I wasn't escaping. I was circling. The forest wasn't following me. It was holding me. And no matter how far I drove, it let me go just far enough to choose to come back. I didn't even remember why I'd come to Olympic in the first place. The memory felt dim now, like I'd been drawn here before I even packed the RV, like something had whispered me across state lines before I ever crossed the border. I stayed there until nightfall, tried calling for a tow, no signal, tried hiking back to the highway, got turned around within 10 minutes. The forest felt denser here, heavier. I remember touching a tree and feeling something pulse beneath the bark, like blood, like breath. Back at the RV, I made dinner just to keep my hands moving. Canned soup, metallic and bitter. I didn't eat it. And that night, the whispering started again. Not outside, not even inside the RV. Inside me. I don't know how to explain it. It was like my thoughts weren't mine anymore. I'd be thinking about how to get out, and suddenly I'd hear, not hear, but the words, "Why leave? You came here for peace. Then you came here for truth. Then you came here because you belong to the forest now." And then I'd jolt, like waking from a trance, like I'd nodded off at the wheel and nearly crashed into a tree. That night I recorded a voice memo, just in case. I still have it. Here's what I said. If anyone finds this RV and I'm not here, I didn't leave, I didn't wander off. The forest, it calls you by name, but not the way people do. It wraps around your soul. It waits for you to forget who you were. Then it tells you who you've always been. I clicked stop and sat there with the recorder still in my hand, breathing like I'd just run 10 miles uphill. Outside, the wind picked up. The trees groaned. And in that moment, I swear I felt the RV move, not sway, not shake, move like something huge had brushed past it. Then the door handle turned, not jiggled, not tested. Turned. I grabbed the hatchet again, but my hands were slick with sweat. The door didn't open, but on the window, just beside the handle, I saw a smudge. A handprint. But it wasn't normal. It was too long, too wide. The fingers were wrong. The proportions off. Like someone had described what a human hand looked like, but had never actually seen one. I backed away slowly, heart hammering in my chest, sat down on the floor of the RV, and held the hatchet across my lap, knees drawn to my chest like a kid hiding from thunder. Then the whisper came again. Not outside, inside my ear. "Joel, you're almost ready." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even blink. The next morning, I opened the door expecting to see footprints, damage, anything. But the ground was untouched. Dew still clung to every blade of grass. The smudge was gone. And that twisted cedar, the one I'd seen back in the hoe, it was here now. I swear it was the same one. Same gnarled bend halfway up the trunk. Same strip of bark missing on one side. Right at the edge of my campsite, like it had walked with me, like it had waited for me to stop. I walked toward it. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe, or resignation. And as I got closer, I saw something at the base of the tree, carved into the trunk, 3 words. "I see you." Not freshly cut, weathered, a year old, maybe 2. But beneath that, newer marks. A name, mine. I stumbled back from the tree, eyes wide, mouth dry. My name, Joel, carved beneath the old message like it had always been there. But I hadn't done it. I swear I hadn't. And yet the grooves were fresh. No moss, no weathering. Like something had done it in the night. Or like I had. But I didn't remember. I didn't remember picking up a knife. I didn't remember walking outside. I didn't remember any of it. And still, a part of me wasn't surprised to see it there. I walked in circles around the campsite, breathing hard, muttering under my breath like a man unraveling thread that won't come loose. No, I didn't. I wouldn't. But there was something familiar about the handwriting. Like I got back into the RV, tore through every drawer until I found my journal, flipped pages with trembling hands, my sketches, my notes, maps of the trails I'd hiked, quotes from poems I couldn't finish, and then I found a page I didn't remember writing. It said, "The trees are patient, the trees are kind, the trees remember before we do." Beneath that, a date, October 6th. Today was October 3rd. I stared at the date for a long time, like maybe I was wrong about what day it was. I grabbed my phone, checked the lock screen. October 3rd. So how had I written something 3 days ahead, unless I hadn't, unless the journal wasn't keeping time right anymore, unless I wasn't? I went back to the tree that afternoon. I wanted to see the carving again, needed to be sure it was real, but the bark was smooth. No words, no name, no trace, like the tree had healed, or like it had never shown me anything at all. I screamed into the woods, not out of anger, out of desperation. Raw, gut-splitting panic. I threw rocks, broke branches, tore at the underbrush until my hands bled, but the trees didn't respond. They didn't move. They didn't whisper. And that somehow made it worse, because it meant they were waiting again. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat outside the RV with the hatchet on my lap and a flashlight pointed toward the trees. I dared them to speak. I dared them to call my name again, and eventually they did, but not just one voice this time. Dozens. All at once, some near, some far. Some in tones I recognized, my father's voice, my ex-wife's, my childhood best friend who drowned when I was 11. Every one of them whispered my name with longing, with sadness, with ownership. And then, the worst part, I heard my own voice. Not inside my head, not from my mouth, but coming from the trees. As if some part of me I didn't know had broken off and gone to live among the moss and rot. And now it wanted me back. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped in the RV, started the engine. Miraculously, it turned over this time, and I drove. I didn't care if the roads were real. I didn't care if the forest had looped them. I just drove. Branches slapped against the sides. The road narrowed, then opened, then narrowed again. Every sign I passed was weathered beyond legibility. I drove until the sky turned pink and then black, then gray again. I passed a ranger station. Empty, abandoned, boarded windows. I didn't stop. The road dipped down into a valley, the trees bending inwards like a cathedral of shadows. The headlights caught something on the road ahead. Not an animal, not a person. A tree. A single tree standing right in the center of the road. But it wasn't just tree. It was that tree, the twisted cedar. Again, I stopped the RV, turned off the engine, the forest hummed, and for the first time, I listened. Not with fear, with recognition. I stepped out of the RV, walked slowly toward the tree. The air thickened around me. Not just fog, something else, like breath held too long, like something waiting to speak, but knowing the sound would break you. When I reached the cedar, I placed my hand on its bark. It was warm, not metaphorically, not from sunlight, body warm. And I heard it, not in my ears, in my chest. A voice, older than language, deeper than fear. It said, "You were never meant to leave." And suddenly, it all clicked. The carvings, the voices, the sense that I'd been here before. I had. Not in this life, not in this body. But something in me had belonged here long before I ever bought that RV, before I left Utah, before I ran from grief like it had teeth. And the forest hadn't hunted me. It had called me home. I dropped the hatchet. I don't know why. Maybe because I finally understood. I wasn't being chased. I was being remembered. And that realization, it broke something open. Behind me, the forest shifted. The trees rustled without wind. A low hum rose in the earth beneath my feet. Not danger, not threat. Invitation. I turned and I saw them. Figures in the trees, not people. Not exactly, shapes, impressions, like shadows made of fog. Each one standing between trunks, half hidden, half formed. And they were all watching me. Waiting. They stood like memories made flesh, those figures in the trees. Some tall, some hunched, some holding the shape of people I used to know. One of them had my father's posture. Another tilted her head the same way my ex-wife did when she was listening but didn't want me to know she still cared. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because the forest was speaking through them now. And it said things I didn't want to hear. That I had wandered through more than wilderness. That this place didn't just exist on maps or GPS grids. That it lived in the spaces between choices. Between grief and stillness. Between all the things we bury and all the things that never stopped watching us from the dark corners of our lives. It told me I hadn't come here to heal. I'd come here to return. To what? I didn't fully understand. But I knew this. I hadn't been lost at all. I'd been called. The figures began to move, slowly, silently between the trees. Not forward, not backward, just circling, like orbiting a center that hadn't yet formed. And that center, I realized, was me. I backed up toward the RV, but I didn't open the door. Not yet. My hand hovered over the handle, heart pounding against my ribs like a second heartbeat trying to escape. And that's when I saw something that stopped me cold. Inside the RV, my reflection. But I wasn't in there. I mean, physically, I was outside, but in the glass of the window looking out, I saw myself staring back. Same face, same clothes, same tired eyes. Only the expression was different. It was smiling, slow, patient, like someone who'd been waiting a long time for me to see the truth. I stumbled back, breath catching in my throat. The forest didn't whisper now. It sang. Not with melody, with memory. I remembered things I'd never lived, walking barefoot through moss so old it glowed, digging my fingers into soil that pulsed like flesh, looking up through the canopy and seeing not sky but stars I didn't recognize. Constellations bent in unfamiliar angles, as if the heavens here answered to something older than God's. And I remembered this. I had been here before, not in this life, not in this form, but I had stood in this forest and called out my own name. And I had heard it answer. The air thickened, the trees leaned in, and something inside me broke, not in pain, but in surrender, a release. I dropped to my knees in the pine needles, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not from fear, from recognition. I wasn't the first to be called here. I wouldn't be the last. We all carry something that the world won't hold. Grief, silence, guilt we don't know how to bury. And when we run far enough for long enough, something ancient takes notice. Not to punish, but to witness, to keep. To keep. I stood, slowly, barely breathing, and I turned to face the tree again, that twisted cedar, now lit from behind by the fading moonlight like a door cracking open. My name was carved into it once more. This time I didn't question how. I reached out, placed my palm on the bark, felt it pulse. Warmth flooded up my arm, across my chest, into my spine, and with it came the forest's final truth. We do not take, we remember. One by one, the figures in the woods turned away, dissolving back into the trees, not vanishing, rejoining. The forest didn't want my body, it wanted my story, it wanted the part of me that wandered, the part that didn't belong to roads or maps or timelines, the part that remembered a different kind of silence, the part that heard whispers in the wind and didn't run, not because it wasn't afraid, but because it needed to know who was whispering. The next morning, I woke up in the RV, alone. The twisted cedar was gone. The forest was quiet, the road finally was clear, and the engine started on the first try. I drove for 3 hours before I saw another person, a ranger at a closed gate, asking if I was part of the missing person search. I told him no. He looked at me strangely, asked how long I'd been in the park. I said 4 nights. He frowned. You sure? Why? He looked down at his clipboard. There was an RV reported missing near the Hoh River on September 21st. Same make, same model, same plates. I froze. Today's October 19th. I didn't argue. I just nodded, thanked him, and drove on. I didn't check the date on my phone. Didn't check the journal. I didn't need to. I knew how long I'd been there. Long enough to remember what I came to forget. Long enough to let the forest write me down in its roots. I don't go camping much anymore. Not deep. Not alone. But sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and step outside just to listen. Not for wind. Not for coyotes. For something quieter, something older, something waiting. And every so often when the breeze passes through the trees just right, I hear it. My name. Soft, patient, welcoming, and I whisper back, because some part of me is still out there, walking barefoot through moss, still circling the cedar, still whispering the name I forgot to forget. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the forest doesn't trap us. Maybe it just remembers what we tried to leave behind. So if you ever find yourself deep in the Olympic wilds and the trees start to move without wind and you hear your name whispered like a promise, Don't run. Listen. Because they only call the ones they know. And if you've heard it once, you were already halfway gone. Story 2. There's a silence in the mountains that doesn't belong to the earth. It feels borrowed, like the land is holding its breath, waiting for you to notice something wrong. That's the kind of silence I woke up to the first morning in the Rockies, long before anything really happened, before the strange things started. Before we realized that not every ranger out here is someone you want to meet. It was the last week of September, just before the weather turns. Me, my wife Kenzie, and our 2 close friends, Tyler and Danny, had decided to take one last RV trip before the snow came in. We're all from Colorado, born and raised, and we've been camping together in different places for years. But this time we wanted something higher, wilder, more remote. I'd read about a lesser-known area west of Estes Park, deep in the Roosevelt National Forest. No cell service, no neighbors, no reservations. Just first-come, first-served forest roads that twist through dense pine and open out into these beautiful little primitive camp clearings. It sounded perfect. Back then, we thought off-grid meant peace, not danger. We took my 22-foot Sprinter van, stocked up in Boulder, and rolled out on a Tuesday morning with just enough gear to last 5 days. I remember Kenzie leaning her head against the window, watching the pine-topped hills go by, saying, "I needed this so bad." Tyler was driving. He always liked taking the wheel when we hit altitude. He's got that kind of restless energy, like if he's not in control of something, he starts pacing. His fiancée Danny was in the back with me, and Ken's reading a dog-eared trail guide out loud and arguing with the GPS. The drive was beautiful, the way those Colorado roads always are, until we left pavement and turned onto Forest Road 256. That's when things started to feel different. There wasn't anything obvious at first. The air just felt heavier. The trees got taller, closer together, like they were swallowing the road. The sun struggled through the canopy in weird, uneven shafts. At some point, the road narrowed to the point where our tires were kissing the grass on either side, and we stopped seeing trail signs. No other campers, no vehicles, no tracks. Just wilderness that kept pressing in. And then we saw him, a ranger, standing about 100 feet ahead, right where the trail dipped between 2 rocky outcrops. He had the uniform, green pants, khaki shirt, badge, hat. He raised his hand like he was flagging us down. No vehicle nearby, no ATV, just him standing in the middle of the road. Tyler slowed, rolled down the window. "You folks looking to camp?" the ranger asked. His voice was even, friendly, like you'd expect. But something about the way he said it made the hair on my arms rise. He was smiling, but his eyes didn't move, didn't blink either, just fixed on us like he already knew who we were. "Yeah," I said, leaning toward the window. "We're hoping to find a spot for a few nights. You know this area well?" "Sure do," he replied without hesitation. "A lot of folks miss the turnoff back there. There's a nice clearing up the next ridge. Fire ring's already built, good shade, nobody else around." He stepped back and gestured for us to keep going. "You'll see a boulder shaped like a dog's head. Turn left there." "Appreciate it," Tyler said, tipping his cap. The man didn't respond, just stood there, smiling as we passed. I looked back through the side mirror after we rounded the bend, and he was still there, still staring, motionless. Kenzie nudged me. "You see his name tag?" "No," I muttered. "Didn't catch it." Me neither. We found the Doghead Rock, just like he said. Past it was a narrow offshoot of trail, half covered in pine needles and barely wide enough for the van. At the end of it, a clearing opened, a circular space surrounded by trees, with a blackened fire ring in the middle and logs set up for seating. It was exactly how he described it. Exactly. It should have felt lucky, but it didn't. That first night was quiet, almost too quiet. We made dinner, cracked open some beers, and sat around the fire until the stars were thick enough to lean into. The usual jokes, stories, and Tyler's horrible acoustic guitar playing. It was almost enough to make me forget the oddness of the ranger. Almost. But around 2 a.m, I woke up to a sound I couldn't explain. At first I thought it was wind, except it didn't move like wind. It was more like a low, humming whistle, rising and falling, circling the van, and underneath it, something crunching lightly in the pine needles. I held my breath, trained my ears, waited for it to fade. But it didn't. It just kept moving, slowly, like someone walking around barefoot. Kenzie stirred beside me. "You hear that?" "Yeah," I whispered. "Don't move." I reached for the curtain and peeked through the windshield. Nothing, just darkness, trees, and the faint glow of our smoldering fire pit. Then I saw it, a shape, standing at the edge of the trees, the silhouette of a person, tall, thin, hat brim low, facing us, not moving. I blinked. Gone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, just waited, eyes on the dark until the sun finally cracked through the pines. At breakfast, nobody mentioned anything. Not until Danny said, "Did you guys hear, like, singing?" Tyler stopped pouring coffee. "What kind of singing?" "Just low. Like old-timey? I thought it was a radio at first." "There's no reception out here," Kenzie said quietly, "and none of us had anything on." They all turned to me. I nodded. There was someone outside, just for a second, watching. "You think it was that ranger?" Tyler asked, face pale now. "I don't know, but something's off." We agreed to hike out to see if we could find where he'd come from. Maybe there was a service station nearby. Maybe he'd left tracks. Anything that could explain the strange presence last night. But there were no tracks. No ranger cabin. No tire marks, just forest, dense and undisturbed, stretching endlessly in every direction. That's when we started to feel watched. Not in the paranoid city brain way. I mean, the kind of feeling that soaks into your bones. Like a pressure behind your eyes, a prickle on your neck, like the trees themselves are leaning in a little closer than before. We couldn't see anyone, but the forest felt aware of us. Listening, waiting. And the further we walked from the campsite, the stronger it got. The trail we were following wasn't on any map Danny had brought. That became obvious about half an hour into the hike. What started as a clear game trail just wandered. It twisted through the woods like it was avoiding something, skirting boulders, leading us under dead trees and over collapsed brush until it thinned into barely more than a faint indentation in the pine needles. And still, we followed it because turning around felt worse, like we were backing away from something that already knew where we'd return to. I kept checking behind us. Nothing, no movement, no sound, and that was part of the problem. The forest was dead quiet, not even birdsong. The only sound was the soft thud of our boots and the irregular snap of old branches underfoot. "I don't like this," Danny whispered, keeping close to Kenzie. "This trail doesn't make sense." "I know," Kenzie said. "It feels like we're being funneled somewhere." Tyler was ahead of us, walking fast, scanning left and right with this rigid, twitchy tension in his shoulders I'd never seen in him before. He was always the brave one, the spontaneous one. But now, even he looked like he wanted to run. Then we saw it. A cabin. Old, rotted, and sagging into the earth like it had been forgotten by time. Moss covered the sides, and half the roof was caved in. One of the windows was broken. A rusted axe leaned against the stoop, blade sunk into the wood as if someone had left it there yesterday. We froze. Nobody spoke. My stomach turned cold. It was the kind of structure you'd never expect to see outside of stories. Out here, this deep in the woods with no marked path, a building like that didn't make sense. "Ranger station?" Tyler offered, but his voice betrayed the answer he didn't want to admit. I stepped forward. "I'll check it out." Kenzie grabbed my arm. "Don't. Please. I just want to see if there's anything inside, something to explain who he is." "Or what he is," Danny whispered. But I pulled away and approached the door. The stairs creaked under my boots, and I half expected the whole place to collapse under me. But it held. Just barely. The door was cracked open. I nudged it with my foot, and it groaned on rusted hinges. It was dark inside, but enough light spilled through the broken roof to reveal what was left. Shelves sagging under the weight of soaked molding paper. A desk in the corner. A cracked lantern on the floor. And nailed to the back wall, badges. Dozens of them. Real Forest Service Ranger badges. Some old, some newer, arranged like trophies. And below them, photos. I stepped closer. Each one showed a different ranger, different uniforms, different decades, all of them staring into the camera, none of them smiling. But it was the last photo that made my skin crawl. It was him. The ranger we saw on the road, same eyes, same flat expression, same hat pulled low, except the photo looked at least 40 years old. The colors had faded, the corners curled from time. But it was him. Exactly him. I backed out of the cabin, heart hammering, nearly falling down the stairs. Kenzie caught me. "What did you see?" "We need to go," I said, almost choking on the words. "We need to go now." We practically ran back to camp. I could feel the woods pressing in tighter around us as we moved, like the trees had drawn a little closer while we were gone. I kept expecting to see the ranger ahead or behind or beside us, but we didn't see anyone. Not until we got back to the van. He was sitting by our fire pit, calm, smiling like nothing was out of place. "I was wondering when you'd make it back," he said. Tyler was the first to break the silence. "Who are you?" The ranger tilted his head slightly. "Just someone who keeps people safe. Lots of things out here that'll eat you alive if you're not careful." "You don't work here," I said. "We saw your photo, in the cabin." That smile stayed locked in place, but his eyes flicked toward me. Sharp, almost hungry. "Ah, so you found my old place. Should have burned it down years ago. Keeps bringing people in." His tone hadn't changed, still friendly, but it had this undertone now, like something oily behind the words, sliding around inside them. Danny was crying softly. Kenzie was gripping my hand so tightly it hurt. "What do you want from us?" Tyler asked, stepping forward. The ranger stood slowly, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves. "I already gave it," he said. "I gave you a place to sleep, a place to feel safe. Most people don't even get that." He took one step toward us. "You should be grateful." That was the last straw. "Get in the van," I shouted. We bolted. I don't remember unlocking it. Don't remember slamming the door or turning the key. All I remember is the sudden roar of the engine and the blur of trees as we tore out of that clearing, crashing over brush and roots and sharp turns that should have flipped us sideways. I looked back once. He was standing in the middle of the trail behind us. Still, smiling, unmoving. We didn't stop driving until we reached cell service, until the trees thinned and the sunlight hit us full, until we could breathe again. We called the ranger station for the area, told them what happened, asked if anyone was patrolling Forest Road 256. They told us no one had worked that area in years. Too remote, too dangerous, and the name we gave them, what we remembered of it from the cabin photos, wasn't on any active list. But he had worked for them once, they said, a long time ago, until he disappeared, without a trace. We stayed the night at a motel in Estes Park, one of those chain places with thin walls and fluorescent hallways that always smell like bleach and old HVAC. But for the first time in hours, we felt like we weren't being watched. We didn't talk much, just sat there in the same room, not even turning on the TV, each of us staring at different corners of the wall like we were still trying to understand what we'd seen, what we'd escaped. I couldn't sleep. My brain kept playing it all back in flashes, the photos, the cabin, the fire pit, his voice, especially his voice. I already gave it, a place to feel safe. It echoed like it had been carved into the inside of my skull. Around 3 a.m., I stepped outside to smoke. I don't even smoke, haven't in years, but I bought a pack from the vending machine in the hallway like some mechanical part of me remembered how to cope. The parking lot was empty, except for our van. And for a moment, just as I lit the cigarette, I saw a shape in the rearview mirror. A figure. Hat brim low, gone when I blinked. I backed toward the stairwell without turning around, too afraid to confirm it was real. By morning, we all agreed we were going to report it, officially. We drove to the local ranger station in town, asked to speak to someone in person. Not over the phone, not filtered. They took us seriously. That surprised me. A tall woman named Officer Kim Wright came out, mid-40s, calm voice, eyes like stone. She didn't smile much, but she listened. Asked us to walk through everything again, every detail. When I got to the part about the cabin, I saw her expression shift, just slightly. You said there were photos on the wall? She asked. And badges? I nodded. They looked real, legit, some were older than others. And you remember the name? She asked. I hesitated. I think the photo was labeled Ranger C. Maddox. That sound familiar? That's when she finally sighed, looked down, and said something I'll never forget. My dad used to tell stories about Maddox, swore up and down that the guy didn't age, said he saw him twice, once when he was a rookie, and again 25 years later. Exact same face, same voice, same eyes. And no one did anything about that? Tyler asked, incredulous. Wright shook her head. You'd be surprised what people are willing to ignore in these mountains, especially if something's been around longer than our maps. Wait, Danny said. Are you saying he's not human? Wright stared at her for a long moment, then turned to me. Did he ask you to follow him? I nodded slowly. Then you're lucky you didn't. We sat in silence for a long time while she wrote things down in a folder and locked it in a drawer. I remember asking her what she meant. What was he? What did he want? She wouldn't answer directly, just said, the mountains remember, and sometimes they answer back. We left Estes Park later that afternoon, but none of us were the same, and I wish that was the end of it. I wish we could have closed the chapter and moved on. But a few weeks later, we got a message that pulled us back in deeper than we ever wanted. It was from a guy named Aaron Roth. He sent it through an old Reddit post Danny had made about the experience, just a throwaway vent under a fake username. Nothing that could have linked back to us unless you were specifically watching for it. Aaron's message was simple. I saw him too. 1997. Same spot. My brother followed him, never came back. He included coordinates, a different area, not the same clearing we'd been to, but close. A neighboring ridge, maybe 10 miles east of where we'd camped. The message ended with a question. If I showed you the badge, would you know if it was his? We debated it for days. Every part of me wanted to ignore it, to move on, to pretend it hadn't happened. But there was something about the way Aaron wrote, something raw, haunted, like someone still living under that shadow, unable to leave it behind. In the end, we drove out to meet him, back to the Rockies, back to the edge of the place we swore we'd never go again. We met at a ranger turnout near a wildlife observation trail. It was midday, overcast, with wind that hissed through the trees like something whispering behind your back. Aaron was already there, lean, quiet, eyes ringed with exhaustion. He didn't say much, just pulled a metal box from his truck bed and set it on the ground. Inside were 5 badges. One of them matched exactly. Found it in a clearing, Aaron said, voice tight, next to a pile of bones, old, sun-bleached. No clothes, no gear, just a femur and that badge. Kenzie turned away, hand to her mouth. Danny started crying again. I picked up the badge, cold, heavy, the engraving faint but readable. Maddox. That was all it said. No first name, no serial number, just that, and etched along the back like someone had carved it with a knife. He follows those who follow. I turned to Aaron. You said your brother followed him? He nodded. Thought he was just being helpful. Same as you. Said he knew a shortcut. A better view of the range. I never saw him again. No one did. But I saw Maddox twice, once right after, once again 10 years later. Same damn face. Didn't speak that second time. Just looked at me. Smiled. Like he remembered. We sat there in silence, holding the badge, watching the forest move. And for the first time since it all happened, I understood we hadn't escaped. We'd just been let go. For now. That night, back in Boulder, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, though I was, but because I felt something else beneath the fear. A quiet, pulsing dread I didn't have words for yet, like I'd stepped too close to something ancient and hungry, and it hadn't finished noticing me yet, like it was still watching me, testing my distance. I stared at the badge we'd brought back from Aaron, held it in my hand like it might still be warm. That back etching, he follows those who follow. It kept echoing in my skull like a threat disguised as prophecy. I started to wonder, how many people had followed? How many had seen that same smile, heard that same calm, guiding voice, and how many never came back? The next morning, I found Tyler sitting in his truck in the driveway, engine off, just sitting there, hands gripping the wheel like he was mid-turn. "You good?" I asked. He nodded, slowly. "I had a dream. We were back in the forest, but it wasn't a dream. It felt like a place, like he brought us there." I didn't say anything. I'd had it too. Kenzie was next. She hadn't slept all night, just paced the apartment, eyes wide, whispering that something was off in our walls. Danny called the same morning, saying she kept hearing a voice humming from inside her closet, a soft, tuneless sound that didn't stop until sunrise. All of us, separately, were feeling it. It was like the forest had stitched a thread through our minds, and now it was tugging. Soft at first, but persistent. Steady. We tried to shake it, ignored it, went back to work, went through the motions, told ourselves it was just trauma, a shared experience warping our memories, but deep down, we knew better. Because the dreams got worse. In mine, I was back in the clearing. But the fire pit was still burning, fresh, and sitting on one of the logs was Maddox, sharpening a blade I'd never seen before. Slowly, over and over. "You came back," he'd say without looking up. And every time I'd wake, my mouth would be dry, my ears ringing with that strange wind hum we'd heard our first night in the woods. One night, I woke with dirt under my nails. Another, Tyler woke up standing on his back porch. Barefoot, no memory of walking there. We were unraveling. And then one day the call came. Not a phone call, not a text, a knocking. 3 slow taps on my front door, just after midnight. I crept down the stairs, heart slamming against my ribs, every light off, afraid to even breathe. And there he was, through the peephole. Maddox. His hat was tilted slightly forward, hands clasped behind his back like he was standing at a funeral, just waiting. I didn't open the door, didn't move, didn't blink. But he saw me. I know he did. He smiled, and then he spoke, though I didn't hear it through glass. I heard it inside, as clearly as if he were whispering in my ear, "You're already mine." I blacked out, woke up on the floor at dawn, freezing, my ears bleeding. That morning, I called everyone. Tyler answered on the first ring. "He came to you too," he said. Not a question, a fact. Kenzie and Danny confirmed it. Same knocking, same smile, same impossible voice. It wasn't a dream. None of it had been. So we did the only thing we could think to do. We drove. Back to Aaron. We found him 2 hours south in a motel near Cannon City. He looked like hell, eyes sunken, face pale, hands trembling as he smoked one cigarette after another. He didn't greet us, didn't explain, just opened the door and said, "He's marked you." That word chilled me more than anything else had. Marked? Aaron nodded. He doesn't let go, not fully. You saw him, you heard him, you followed. That's all it takes. You're part of his woods now, even if you leave. Then what do we do? Kenzie asked, voice barely holding. Aaron looked up, eyes dark, hollow. You don't go back, he said. You don't talk about him, you don't search, and whatever you do, you never, ever answer if he calls again. But it was already too late. That night we dreamed again. Only this time it was the same dream. All 4 of us, back in the clearing, fire burning, cabin whole again, and Maddox standing beside it, arms open like he was welcoming us home. He didn't speak this time. He just stepped backward into the trees and vanished. And we followed. Even in our sleep, we followed. We woke up shaking. Kenzie screamed. Tyler punched a hole through the drywall. Danny was bleeding from her ears. We were losing the boundary between dreaming and waking, between here and there, between us and him. I tried to burn the badge. It didn't catch. Even when I left it on a grill burner, the metal stayed ice cold, unmarked, like it refused to be destroyed. We tried burying it in a field outside town, but the next day it was back in my mailbox, wrapped in pine needles. We spent the next 3 days in Tyler's garage, windows blacked out, every possible point of entry sealed, phones off, GPS removed from the van. We even dismantled the smoke detectors because we were convinced he could use the sound. At this point, it wasn't about running. It was about hiding from something that wasn't supposed to be able to follow you home, something that, by every law of the natural world, should have belonged to a forest we'd left behind. But Maddox didn't belong to the natural world anymore. On the 3rd night, Danny tried to leave. She stood up from the corner without a word, eyes glassy, feet moving like they weren't hers. Kenzie caught her just before she opened the door. "He's calling me," Danny whispered. "He said it's time, that he's been waiting." We tied her hands with old paracord and begged her to stay grounded. Tyler held her like she was already gone. That was the breaking point. We couldn't live like this. We needed help. Not just stories and warnings and dreams. We needed something real. Something that could break the link. Kenzie found it buried in a comment thread deep on a survivalist forum. A user named Elias43, claiming to be a former Forest Service officer who'd worked in the Rockies back in the 80s, said he'd seen the one who wears the badge too long. Said the only way out was to finish the path you started. Don't run. Don't fight. Go back to where he gave you your fear. Burn the path behind you. Speak your own name out loud. Then bury what he left in you. It sounded like madness, but it was the only plan we had. So we went back. Not together. Alone. That's what Elias said. It had to be faced one-on-one. Otherwise, the forest couldn't know who was ready to break free. I chose a day in early November, drove north alone through frostbitten valleys and snow-dusted canyons until I hit the forest road again. It looked different now. Older. Meaner. The trees leaned closer. Their bark split like they were bleeding sap. No birds, no sun. The same clearing was there. Exactly as we'd left it, and so was he. Standing by the fire pit, head tilted slightly, hands clasped like a man waiting for a handshake. "You came back," he said. I didn't answer. I walked straight to the center of the clearing where the fire once burned. Dropped my bag, pulled out the badge. He watched me. Not angry, not smug, just curious, like a scientist watching a rat navigate a maze. I poured lighter fluid into a circle around my boots, soaked the badge in it, then struck a match. "You don't belong to me," I said. He took one step forward. "You never did." I dropped the match. The fire roared, and for the first time I saw Maddox change. His face didn't melt or twist or scream. It just shifted, like he didn't understand what was happening, like someone had flipped a switch he didn't know existed. The smile vanished. Then he disappeared. Mid-step, mid-breath, gone. The fire roared higher for a moment, then died to embers. And I stood there, alone in the smoke, heart pounding like it would crack my ribs open. I whispered my name, over and over, until the trees no longer echoed it back. When I came back down from the mountains, the dreams stopped. So did the visits. No more humming in the dark, no more knocking, no more Maddox. Tyler, Kenzie, Danny, they all did the same in their own time. Some waited longer, some resisted, but one by one they faced it, and it let them go. Mostly. I still get reminders sometimes, a flicker in the corner of a mirror, a ranger's hat on the news, a trail sign that wasn't there yesterday, little things, quiet things, but I never go back, never follow. We all learned that fear doesn't come from what you see in the woods. It comes from what follows you home. The forest doesn't want your life. It wants your memory, your belief, your obedience. It wants you to forget who you are so you can belong to it instead. But if you hold your name, if you burn the path behind you, you can walk out. Just don't look back. And if you ever see a smiling ranger alone on a trail with no vehicle, no radio, and no name, keep walking, no matter how friendly he seems. Because once you follow, you're already his. And the mountains, they remember. Story 3. I've never been scared of being alone. Not in the traditional sense, anyway. Some people can't take the silence, the space, the way it swallows up your thoughts and leaves you with nothing but yourself. But I've always liked it. Driving hours without saying a word, watching the road curve out into the horizon, the hum of the tires syncing with my heartbeat. There's something honest about solitude. Something clean. Until it turns on you. That night in the Everglades was the first time I ever felt like the silence was watching me back. It was early November, just cold enough that most tourists had cleared out, but warm enough that you didn't need much more than a blanket and a cracked window to sleep. I was 3 weeks into a solo Volkswagen road trip through the southeast. Florida was supposed to be my last stop before heading west again. My van, an old '87 Vanagon Westphalia I'd spent 2 years restoring, was my pride. Sun-faded red with white pop top and the kind of rattling engine sound that made it feel alive. I called her Marla. The plan was simple: 2 nights deep in the glades, off one of those barely marked forest roads that twist through mangroves and sawgrass. I wasn't in a developed campground, not really. Just a flat patch of earth near a murky canal, far enough off the trail that even locals probably didn't bother coming out this way. I had solar panels, a cooler, a little propane burner, enough supplies for a week, more than enough for 2 days. I pulled in around dusk, parked parallel to a thick stand of bald cypress trees. I remember how the air felt, wet, dense, like it had weight. Everything smelled like rotting leaves and distant salt. The hum of insects was constant, textured. It sounded like static, but layered. High-pitched buzzes mixed with low croaks and the occasional deep splash of something breaking the water. Normal Everglades stuff. Nothing to worry about. I was tired, but not from driving. It was that kind of quiet exhaustion that builds from being too alert for too long. When you're solo camping in remote places, your brain doesn't shut off the same way. You're listening, even when you're asleep. Every twig snap, every gust of wind becomes something to categorize. Animal? Weather? Threat? Still, I'd done this before, dozens of times. So I made a little dinner, boiled rice, canned black beans, some chili powder, then rinsed the pot with water from my jug. I didn't wander. I didn't make a fire. I kept my light low and the van locked up. Everglades protocol, right? By 9:30, I'd folded down the bed in the back, cracked one of the rear vent windows, and crawled into my sleeping bag. Marla's interior was tight but comforting. Curtains drawn, the red glow of the solar-powered lamp casting soft shadows on the cabinetry. I checked my phone, 1 bar, no data, and set it on the shelf above my head. Then I laid back, stared at the ceiling, and let the swamp sounds cradle me into sleep. I don't know how long I was out before I woke up. Maybe an hour, maybe 3, but it wasn't a noise that stirred me. It was something else, a feeling. Have you ever woken up with a sudden certainty that you're not alone? It's not like hearing footsteps or voices. It's quieter than that. It's the stillness that wakes you. The way your own breath sounds too loud, the way your skin starts to tingle with adrenaline even before your brain understands why. My eyes opened to pitch black. The lamp had gone out, probably timed out after a few hours. I blinked, sat up halfway, and listened. Nothing. Just the same swamp static, only muffled. I could hear the insects, but they sounded far away, like I was underwater. Then I heard it. Wet. Slow. Something dragging. It came from inside. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind shifting something, a bag falling, maybe my water jug rolling. But then I realized something that sent my stomach into a slow, cold knot. I'd locked the doors. All of them. And I hadn't opened them since. I lay frozen, my hands gripping the sides of the sleeping bag like it was armor. The sound came again, closer this time. A slithering weight like soaked towels being dragged across carpet. There was a sharp squeak, the sound of something wet brushing against metal. I turned my head toward the kitchenette. My eyes were adjusting now, and I could make out the shapes inside the van. The cabinets, the table, the little counter. Nothing moved. I didn't want to move either. Then something bumped the back of the driver's seat. A slow, deliberate thump, like someone pressing their palm against it and dragging it downward. I flinched, every muscle going tight. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I reached slowly for the flashlight in the mesh side pocket of the bed platform. My fingers fumbled. I couldn't find it. The sound moved again, toward the foot of the bed now. I heard a moist squelch, like suction pulling free from vinyl, and the tiniest whistle of breath. Not human breath. Not even animal breath. It was like a wet balloon deflating. Hissing. Sick. I snapped. I lunged upward and hit the overhead light. The red lamp blinked on, filling the cabin with a dim glow. Nothing. The van was empty. Empty. I stared at the footwell, the kitchenette, the driver's seat. Nothing there. I was shaking. My skin felt damp, my throat dry. I checked the windows, all still closed except the rear vent I'd cracked. It was tiny, barely 6 inches wide. No way anything larger than a raccoon could get through, and I would have heard that, right? Still, I shut it, latched it tight. Then I searched the van. Every cabinet, under the seats, glove compartment, nothing. I was alone, but I didn't feel alone. The air smelled different, not just musty swamp air anymore. There was something sweeter now, sickly, like meat just starting to turn. I'd smelled it once before, when I found a dead armadillo under my porch back in Texas. I didn't sleep after that. Just lay there, heart pounding, eyes locked on the ceiling, listening. Every creak of the van, every shift of the frame felt like a whisper against my ear. I kept the light on all night. When the sun finally rose, I crawled out of the van, barefoot, into dew-soaked grass and silence. Everything was still. Still and wrong. Because in the dirt behind the van, just beneath the vent I'd left open, were tracks. Not paw prints, smears. Long, finger-width trails in the soil, as if something soft and fleshy had dragged itself forward and then stopped, right beneath my window. I stood there barefoot, staring at the ground like I could unsee it. The grass was matted down, moist with dew, but the trails were unmistakable. Something had moved there, something that didn't walk the way things should. There was no rhythm to the prints, no gait, no pattern of paws or claws, just those long, dragging streaks in the earth, like a body pulling itself forward. Too deliberate to be a snake, too wide, too human. I didn't touch them. I couldn't. The sun had just cleared the trees, casting long orange shadows that made the van glow like blood. The Everglades were wide open around me, but I'd never felt more trapped. I stood frozen in the quiet for what felt like hours, until the sound of a distant egret call finally snapped me out of it. I told myself it had to be a possum, or a raccoon, maybe a gator, young enough to squeeze into tight spots. But none of those made sense. Not the way it moved, not the smell. I told myself I'd imagine the sound. I told myself a lot of things that morning. I spent most of the day in the driver's seat, windows down, letting the humid breeze blow through the cabin. I didn't open the back hatch. I didn't nap. I kept the doors locked. I didn't turn on music or make coffee or sit outside in the camp chair I usually loved. I just waited. For what, I wasn't sure. Around noon, a pair of dragonflies zipped past the windshield and I almost jumped. Everything had me on edge. I laughed at myself, then rubbed my hands over my face, trying to shake it. But the unease wasn't going anywhere. It was soaked into the fibers of the van now, clinging to the curtains, curling into the corners. Even Marla felt unfamiliar. By early evening, I decided I was leaving. I didn't care that I had another night booked. I didn't care about the gas or that it was already getting dark. I needed out. I cranked the ignition. Nothing. I tried again, held the key in the ignition until the engine choked and clicked. Still nothing. "Come on, Marla," I whispered. "Don't do this now." Third try. A weak cough, then silence. My heart started to hammer. The battery was full. I'd checked it that morning. My solar charge was good. There was no reason the engine shouldn't start. I tried again and again. Still nothing. I sat there in the driver's seat as the last of the sun dipped below the mangroves, casting deep, ink-colored shadows across the trail. The forest looked like it was holding its breath. Not even the frogs were calling anymore. Just the faint clicking of insects and the crackle of wind moving through brittle reeds. I turned off the key, leaned back, and tried to think. I had a jump box under the seat, but I knew it wouldn't help. The battery wasn't dead. This was something else. That's when I heard it, a soft, wet thump inside, behind me. I turned, slowly staring at the kitchenette again. Nothing. The lamp was on. I hadn't turned it on, I was sure of that. I'd shut everything off before getting into the front seat, but now it was glowing that soft red glow again, like before. And on the counter, something small, a smudge. I reached back over the seat and touched it with one finger. Slime. Not condensation, not water. Slime. Clear, slightly yellowed, sticky between my fingertips. The kind of slime that comes out of something living. I wiped my hand on a towel and grabbed my flashlight, flipping it on. The beam shook slightly as I moved it across the interior. Everything looked normal. My bedding was still in place, my cooking gear untouched, except the drawer beneath the sink. It was open 2 inches. I didn't leave it like that. Slowly, I leaned over, grabbed the edge, and pulled. It opened with a soft scrape. Empty, except for a long streak of that same viscous slime dragged across the inside like something had slithered in or out. I slammed it shut and backed away, heart pounding. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I knew I wasn't staying another night. I grabbed my bag, phone, water bottle, and flashlight and stepped out of the van. I walked quickly toward the trail, my boots crunching against the dry earth. I figured if I hiked 3 miles north, I could hit one of the main access roads and maybe flag someone down. I'd never left Marla alone before, but I didn't care. Not now. I got maybe 50 yards before I stopped. It was the quiet. Not normal quiet, too complete. No frogs, no birds, no wind. It was like something had sucked all the air out of the world. I turned around. The van was still there, half hidden beneath the trees, and the passenger door was open, wide open. I hadn't touched it. I swear I hadn't. Something was moving inside, a shape barely visible through the open door, heavy, wet, crawling across the back floorboard with a slowness that made my teeth ache. I took one step backward, then another. A branch snapped under my foot. The shape stopped moving. I turned and ran. Not fast, not like in a movie. I ran like my body was full of wet cement and every breath scraped against my ribs. The flashlight bounced wildly in my hand as I stumbled down the trail, heart smashing against my chest. I didn't look back. Not until I hit the canal road, knees trembling, shirt soaked in sweat. No lights. No movement. Just the van, now completely dark, tucked into the trees like it had never moved. I sat there for nearly 2 hours, waiting for a car to come. Nothing did. I could feel the weight of the swamp pressing in from all sides, like the trees were leaning in to listen. Every rustle made me jump. Every mosquito buzz sounded like a whisper. Eventually, I crept back toward the van, stopping just at the tree line. The passenger door was closed. The lamp inside was off. Everything looked normal, but it wasn't. Because as I approached the back of the van, flashlight beam cutting through the dark, I saw something that stopped me cold. The rear vent, latched shut just 12 hours earlier, was open again. Not cracked, wide open, and something was dripping from the edge. I wanted to believe it was dew. I really did. But dew doesn't smell like that. It doesn't cling in thick strands or glisten like spit or leave an acidic, almost coppery scent hanging in the air. I stared at that vent for what felt like minutes, just stared, because going closer meant accepting what I already knew. Something had come through, again. And this time, it wasn't in a hurry to leave. I stood there in the weak beam of my flashlight, watching a droplet swell on the edge of the vent's frame, grow heavy, then fall to the bumper with a tiny wet splat. My stomach turned. I could feel sweat pool between my shoulder blades. The whole van felt wrong, like it wasn't mine anymore, like something else had taken up residence inside Marla, and I was the trespasser now. I backed away slowly, every part of me screaming to run, but something kept me rooted. I couldn't leave her. I know that sounds insane, but it wasn't just a van. It was years of work, months of memories. Every trail, every night under the stars, every stretch of cracked desert highway, I'd done it all with her. And now something was inside, something that had no business being there, and I couldn't just walk away. I crept around to the side, careful not to step on branches or leaves. My boots were soaked. The ground was soft again, too soft. Like the earth had been churned by something weighty crawling over it again and again. I reached the sliding door. Listened. Nothing. No breath. No shuffle. Not even the faint hum of electronics. I reached for the handle. Waited. Then slid it open fast, like ripping off a bandage. The interior was dark. My flashlight beam jumped around the cabin, onto the bed, the cabinets, the footwell. Everything looked untouched. But the smell was stronger now. Not quite rot, but close. Fungal. Like something that had lived too long in wet darkness. A cave smell. My eyes stung from it. I had to breathe through my mouth. I climbed inside slowly, crouching low like I was trying not to wake a baby. Every surface looked just as I'd left it the night before. The bedding was undisturbed, the drawers closed, except for the fridge. The little top-loading 12-volt fridge I used to keep drinks and fruit, it was open an inch, just like the drawer before. And there was slime on the lid, same as before. Same trail, same yellowish film that shimmered under the light. I shut it and backed toward the bed, heart thudding like it wanted out of my chest. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe some terrible shape curled beneath the sink, or a face pressed against the curtain, but there was nothing, no movement, no sound. Until I touched the mattress, it was damp, not from spilled water. It felt lived in, like someone had sweat into it, like something warm had lain there, soaking its shape into the foam. The middle was sunken, compressed, the way it gets when someone's been sleeping in the same spot for hours. I jerked my hand back, flashlight beam whipping toward the vent again. Still open. Still dripping. That's when the thought hit me. What if it wasn't coming in through the vent? What if it was leaving? What if it was in here all day? The idea hit like a gut punch. The hours I'd sat up front, with nothing but a curtain separating me from this space. I could have reached back. I could have touched it. I could have turned around and seen it, looking back at me. I spun and scanned every corner again, under the seat, behind the gear bags, even inside the shallow storage cubby where I kept my books. Nothing. But I didn't feel relief. I felt dread, because it was still out there, and it knew I'd seen it now. That changed everything. I didn't sleep that night, didn't even lie down. I sat in the driver's seat with a hatchet in my lap and the flashlight clutched in my other hand, my back against the door and eyes fixed on the vent. I kept it shut this time, latched it, duct taped it, and stuck a rag in the crack just to be sure. I didn't blink much, just stared into the red gloom of the van, listening. And sometime hours before dawn, I heard it again. Not inside. This time, it was on the van. Just above me. A faint sound like suction cups peeling off metal, like skin sliding across fiberglass. It moved from the roof toward the rear, slow and deliberate. I killed the flashlight. My heart thudded in the dark, every beat loud as a drum. I could feel the pressure of it above me, like the ceiling had lowered, like the walls had bowed in. The van was no longer my shelter. It was a box, a trap. Something had crawled onto my sanctuary and claimed it. Then the creaking started, the faintest flecks of metal like something shifting its weight. I wanted to scream, to burst out and run. But I knew better. That thing had already opened my doors, already been inside. If I ran, it would follow, so I waited while it slid slowly back toward the vent as if testing it, and then just before dawn, the sound stopped. When the light returned and the insects began to chirp again, I opened the door and stepped out. There were no marks on the roof, no scratches, no footprints, nothing. Except on the back window, written in the dew, just 4 smeared lines, 3 finger streaks, as if something inside had watched me the whole time. Those 4 lines, just 4, smeared with a finger or something like a finger on the back window. 3, it wasn't a word. Wasn't even a message in the way we usually think of messages, but it said everything. It said, I was here. It said, I'm counting. I stood in the rising heat of the Everglades morning, staring at those lines like they were carved into me. I didn't touch them. I didn't wipe them off. I just turned and walked back into the forest like a man who forgot how to be afraid, or maybe one who'd just grown used to it. The trail out was different now. It wasn't just that the sunlight was brighter or that the swamp seemed louder. It was that I could feel something watching me, not from a distance, but near, close enough that the hairs on my neck never went down. The Everglades weren't empty. They were full, overflowing with movement just outside the corners of my eyes. I kept hearing things in the trees, faint rustles, brief crunches. I told myself it was birds, lizards, gators. But I knew it wasn't. Not anymore. I made it halfway to the access road before I stopped. Something was in front of me, in the brush, maybe 20 feet off trail. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. Wet, heaving, dragging. The same sound from inside the van, but louder now, bolder. Whatever it wasn't hiding anymore. I backed away slowly, 1 step, then 2, And then it made a sound, something between a gurgle and a whisper, like someone exhaling through a mouthful of water. It didn't come from lungs. It came from below, from the throat or something, pretending to have one. I turned and ran. The forest blurred. Roots clawed at my boots. Branches whipped my arms. I didn't care. I didn't stop until I reached Marla again, panting, legs aching, heart pounding. But the van was open, all the doors, the sliding door, the passenger door, even the back hatch, wide open like a gutted rib cage. Something had gone through her. The inside was wrecked. My bedding, shredded, the drawers ripped from their slides, my books soaked and swollen. And in the center of the floor where I'd once kept my spare tools was a puddle. Dark, viscous, smelling like mold, bile, and something else. Salt. I backed out, bile rising in my throat. I wanted to leave, to abandon the van and run until I collapsed. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was fear of the forest, or maybe I thought if I kept moving, whatever this thing was might follow me out, might spread. So I stayed. I spent that whole day in a fog, cleaning what I could, sealing the vents, checking the engine, which now suddenly started on the first try, as if whatever had come in had finished its work. The sun was high when I found the second message. Inside the cabinet under the sink, carved into the particle board, not written, carved, 3 letters, you. I sat on the ground outside the van for over an hour, just breathing, trying to make sense of it. You. Not I see you, not get out, just you. Like a name, like an accusation, like an answer to a question I hadn't asked. It didn't matter anymore. I was done. By late afternoon, I packed up what was left, slammed every door, and turned Marla north. I didn't care about the rest of my trip. I didn't care about the mileage. I just needed road, endless, smooth road, with nothing but distance behind me. But distance doesn't mean escape, because something came with me. I don't mean in the physical sense, at least I don't think I do. But that night, 100 miles north, camped at a paved site near Lake Okeechobee, I heard it again. The sliding sound, soft, wet, not inside this time, but around me. Circling the van, I shut every vent, every latch, sat up all night again with the hatchet across my knees. I didn't see anything. But in the morning, pressed against the inside of the windshield was another streak. This time, 5 lines. No slime, just the marks. But I knew. It wasn't a count anymore. It was a hand, a full hand. I left Florida that same day, drove north through Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, faster than I'd ever driven Marla. Slept in Walmart parking lots, never turning the engine off for more than a few hours. I didn't trust stopping. I didn't trust the woods. Not anymore. The worst part is, I started to recognize the smell. It would show up in patches, in gas stations, on sidewalks, once even inside a fast food bathroom in Mississippi. That sickly salt meat. It's just a whiff, but enough to make my pulse spike. By the time I made it back to Texas, I wasn't the same person. Neither was the van. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in her anymore. I parked her behind my garage, threw a tarp over her, and left her to sit. Sometimes I think I hear her engine clicking at night, like it's trying to turn over, but I never check. I won't open her doors again, because I know what I'll find. More streaks, more messages, and someday, maybe not soon, maybe years from now, I know I'll see something worse. A face, or what it thinks a face should be. I kept Marla parked for 8 months, tarped, wheel-chocked, locked up like she was contagious. People asked me if I was ever going to drive her again. I'd smile, nod, say maybe next spring, but I knew better. Marla wasn't mine anymore. Not really. She had something in her now, or maybe she always had. Maybe I just didn't see it before. I started researching. Not cryptids, not monsters. I wasn't looking for fantasy. I wanted facts, biology, history, folklore. I dug through forums, found swamp legends, whispered warnings from Miccosukee and Seminole elders, things that slithered between the sawgrass, things that weren't animals or ghosts or gods, but something older, something wetter, hungrier. They called them watchers. Some stories said they were born from the drowned. Others said they were always there, half-formed, half-human things that pulled themselves out of swamps when the air was thick with grief. Creatures that didn't hunt the way predators did. They waited, watched, found people alone, and mirrored them. Studied them until they knew how to move, how to sound, how to breathe, just wrong enough to be noticed. And then they got inside, not just into vans, into heads. I didn't know what to do with that knowledge. I still don't. I just stopped camping, sold off my gear, deleted my road trip photos, stopped answering messages from people asking when the next VW vlog was dropping. Because the truth is, once something like that crawls inside your life, nothing feels safe again. Not the woods, not the road, not even your own mind. Some nights I still hear it, that soft, dragging sound, not loud, not close, but steady, like it's getting stronger, like it's growing bolder the longer I deny it. Other times, I catch it out of the corner of my eye, never straight on, just a shimmer in the window, a shape behind the curtain, a flash in the rearview mirror that disappears when I look again. But worst of all is the smell. It shows up in places it shouldn't. Inside my house, at the grocery store. Once, while I was sitting in my therapist's office mid-sentence, trying to explain why I hadn't slept a full night in months, I caught it. That salt-rotted, wet clay reek. Faint, but real. I stopped talking. She noticed, asked what was wrong. I said nothing, just shook my head. Because what was I going to say? Something crawled into my van in the Everglades, and it followed me home. No one believes that. Hell, I don't believe it. Except I do. Because there are things in this world that move when we're still, that seep in through the cracks when we're vulnerable, alone, convinced we're safe because the doors are locked and the windows are shut. But locks don't stop what's already invited. And I think somewhere along that trip, I invited it. Maybe it wasn't the vent, maybe it wasn't even the Everglades, maybe it was me, my silence, my solitude, the way I cut ties and called it freedom. Maybe the thing crawled in through the same space I cleared out for myself, mistaking emptiness for peace. That's what no one tells you about being alone out there, about truly living inside your van, day after day, state after state. You empty yourself, you get used to the quiet. And when something starts whispering in that quiet, you don't always notice, not until it's too late. People still message me asking about Marla, asking if I'll ever sell her. I never answer, because she's not for sale. She's not even a van anymore. She's a door. One I opened once, and one I'll never dare open again. So if you ever find yourself down in the Everglades, chasing freedom or silence or something you lost out on the road, remember this. Crack your window if you must, but listen before you sleep. Not just to what you hear, but to what you don't. And if something comes crawling soft and slow inside your little bubble of peace, don't look at it. Don't listen. Don't acknowledge it. Because once you do, it never leaves. It just waits for the next time you're alone, and then it whispers your name and climbs back in. Story 4. I never used to be the kind of person who feared the forest. I grew up in Idaho, the kind of kid who thought tree bark was more familiar than drywall. My dad had an old Winnebago that he parked behind the house, and by the time I was 13, I could drive it better than I could my mom's sedan. Camping was what we did. It was our rhythm, our medicine, our escape from anything that ever felt too artificial. But the thing about nature is the more time you spend in it, the more you understand that it doesn't need to be loud to be dangerous. Sometimes it just waits, quietly, like it did for me in the fall of 2022. I was 34, recently divorced, and trying to get my head right by driving through the national parks. I had converted an old 1989 Volkswagen Vanagon into a pretty decent rolling home, solar, a fold-out bed, the works. I called her Maple, not because of her color, but because of the way she smelled when the sun hit her rusted frame in the morning. That warm, sweet metallic scent, like the past trying to seep into your lungs. I'd been on the road about 3 weeks when I heard about a stretch of the Great Smoky Mountains where cell service dropped completely and the rangers didn't patrol often. A friend at a truck stop in Knoxville told me about it. His exact words, "It's beautiful, untouched, but the locals call it the Whisper Corridor." He smiled afterward, but not with his eyes. People vanish out there, not in a big dramatic way. They just stop being found. Now, I've heard plenty of local legends in my life, skinwalkers in Utah, the devil's tramping ground in North Carolina, the woman who sings in the woods of Yosemite, but something about the way he said, "stop being found," made the air feel heavier. Still, I nodded, fueled more by boredom and a creeping ache in my chest than by logic, and I drove out toward that part of the park. It took me 3 hours to get deep enough in to feel truly alone. No headlights in either direction. No signs. No gas stations or rest areas. Just endless green, dense, and ancient, like the trees had been standing there since before humans remembered fire. The forest didn't feel inviting, but it didn't feel hostile either. It felt like it didn't care about me at all, and that was worse. I found an old overgrown pull-off just past a stone marker that had long since been consumed by moss. I could barely make out the words carved into it. Cade's Hollow. The map didn't show it. The GPS was frozen, but the spot was level, and I was too tired to keep driving, so I backed Maple into the clearing and shut her off. The silence was complete. I don't mean the absence of noise, I mean the presence of something deeper. The absence of movement. No wind, no birds, no insects. I stood there outside my van, arms crossed, waiting for my ears to adjust, waiting to hear the world again. But it never came. When night fell, it fell hard. The kind of darkness you feel on your teeth. The forest swallowed the moonlight, and even my lantern barely pushed back against it. I made some tea, opened the side hatch of the van, and tried to read. But my eyes kept darting toward the trees, not because I heard anything, but because I didn't. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard the first knock. It came from the side of the van, the side not facing the woods, the side that should have been facing nothing but a slope and some old rocks. Just one knock, firm. Not a branch, not a squirrel, a knuckle, skin on metal. I froze. I waited. Nothing. I turned off the light inside the van and pressed my back to the wall, listening. Nothing moved. I told myself I'd imagined it, that maybe a pine cone fell from a tree or maybe the van shifted slightly on its suspension. But I didn't believe it. Not really. At 3:13 a.m., I remember the time exactly. It happened again. This time, 3 knocks. Same rhythm. Same pressure. Like someone was making sure I knew they were there, and this time I heard something else. After the last knock, breathing. It was soft. Shallow. Right outside the window behind my head. I didn't move. I barely breathed myself. My body locked up in a way I'd never experienced before, not even when I'd flipped my dirt bike at 17 and thought I'd snap my spine. This was a different kind of terror. Ancient, instinctual. Like my bones were telling me that whatever was outside wasn't meant to exist next to something like me. I stayed frozen until the sun rose, and when it did, I flung the door open and ran a wide circle around the van. No footprints, no signs of animals, nothing but dew and silence. That should have been the moment I left. But it wasn't. That day, I hiked a few miles down a trail that didn't seem marked, just a faded path leading deeper into the woods, flanked by gnarled roots and trees that leaned toward the trail like they were eavesdropping. The deeper I went, the more wrong it felt. I found the remnants of a fire pit, old, circular stones with blackened insides. Nearby, a rusted camping chair, tipped over and half swallowed by the ground. A backpack, torn open, contents scattered. But no ID, no bones, no clue of who had sat there before me, just a can of beans, long expired, and a soggy paperback novel with the name Gracie written inside the cover in looping, hopeful handwriting. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat upright in the driver's seat, keys in hand, and every muscle locked. At 1:57 a.m., the knocks came again, but this time they weren't on the van. They came from the woods, a slow, deliberate rhythm. Knock, knock, then silence, then again. Closer. It was like someone had found a tree trunk and was slapping it in a pattern, like a signal or a countdown. I turned the ignition. Maple sputtered, coughed, and died. Battery, dead, lights too. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching the edge of the woods. Something moved. Just a flicker. A shape. Low to the ground, wrong proportions, not a bear, not a coyote. I've seen both. This moved like it wasn't used to its body. Then, a voice, soft, female. Right outside my door. Gracie? It whispered. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. My throat closed up so tight I couldn't have screamed if I wanted to. Gracie, it said again. Closer, louder, like it was trying out the name for the first time. I looked down at the paperback still sitting on my dashboard, and that's when I realized something. That voice, it wasn't asking for Gracie. It was repeating the name, mimicking, copying, like it had found the book or heard me say the name out loud earlier, and now it was trying it on. I sat still for what felt like hours, the name echoing in my ears long after the voice itself had gone. I didn't know how to explain it, how a word I'd read from a waterlogged book could come back to me like that, shaped by something just beyond the tree line. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks, that maybe I was overtired, hungry, emotionally drained, but deep down I knew better. The forest had heard me, and it was answering in its own way. When morning came, I stepped out slowly. I didn't find footprints, but I did find something worse. Drag marks in the dew, long and erratic, like something had crawled on elbows and knees around my van. Circles, loops, and then they just stopped at the edge of the woods. I walked back to that fire pit later that day. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd find something I missed. Maybe I just wanted to see that I wasn't imagining it all. The air was still, stifling. Even the leaves hung limp in the trees. No breeze, no birds. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint, like rotting citrus and wet copper. It was coming from just beyond the trail, downhill a little. I followed it, heart pounding, one foot in front of the other, until I saw it. A clearing I hadn't seen the day before, partially obscured by fallen branches and undergrowth. There were tents, 3 of them, torn, mold-streaked, partially collapsed under the weight of seasons of neglect. One still had a sleeping bag inside, zippered up tight, but when I peeled it open, it was empty. Just some shredded cloth and a Polaroid photo face down near the corner. I turned it over with my boot. It was a woman, smiling, arms around 2 kids, one missing a front tooth, the other holding a teddy bear. The date said 2017. I felt something snap in my stomach, like gravity turned upside down. Why had no one come looking for them? Why had no one cleaned this out? How could the rangers not know? And then I saw the etching. Scratched into the tree at the center of the clearing, barely visible through the moss and bark scars, were dozens of names. I couldn't read them all. Time and weather had taken most of the detail, but a few were clear enough to stop me cold. One of them was Gracie. Another said Joshua Bell, 2002. And then one near the bottom, carved deeper, newer, Avery Marks, 2022. My name. I stood there, unblinking, throat clenched so hard I couldn't swallow. I hadn't told anyone where I was going, not even my ex-wife, and no one I'd met on the road knew my last name. It was like the forest had already written me in. I backed out of the clearing, stumbling, breath ragged. I didn't stop moving until I was back at Maple. The keys were still in the ignition, but when I tried again, nothing happened. No click, no life. Like the engine had been hollowed out overnight. I spent that whole day trying to walk the road back towards civilization. I figured if I could just get far enough out, maybe I'd catch a signal. Maybe I could flag someone down. But the deeper I walked, the stranger the road became. It twisted in ways it shouldn't have. Doubled back on itself. Once, I swear I walked for an hour and ended up right back at my own van from the opposite side. Time stopped making sense. It wasn't until dusk that I finally saw something new. A trail marker nailed to a tree. It was weathered, half-rotted, but the words were still legible. Ranger Station, 2.1 miles. I didn't think, I just ran. The trail narrowed fast, winding down into a shallow ravine, the canopy above growing thicker with every step. My lungs burned, my legs shook, but I kept going until I saw the structure. It was real. An old ranger outpost, wooden, mossy, but still standing. A porch lamp hung loose above the door, and a radio antenna reached up through the trees. I rushed the door, slammed my fist against it. No answer. I pushed it open. Inside, it was quiet. dust motes in the slanted light, a desk with maps, radios, a logbook. I moved to the desk, flipped open the log, desperate for a sign of anyone, any presence at all. The last entry was dated May 19th, 1989. It read, "Another report of whispers. Third one this week. I've told them not to camp near Cades Hollow, but they don't listen. I'm starting to think the forest chooses. We just report what we find or don't find. Rations low. Radio's cutting out again." Then, scribbled below that in a different hand, "Some things are better off not found." The radio was dead. No power. I searched the drawers for a flare, a flashlight, anything that could help me, but all I found were maps that showed trails I hadn't seen and lakes that weren't there. The forest outside had gone dark again, and this time the knocking didn't wait. It came from beneath the floorboards. Just once. But deliberate. I stood there in that ranger station, map shaking in my hands, as the knock came again. Closer this time. I backed into the far corner of the room, pressing myself against the filing cabinets, the air so thick I felt like I was breathing through gauze. A third knock. Then silence. And then a voice. This time it didn't say Gracie, it said, "Avery." And then, in a child's voice, "Are you going to stay with us now?" I don't know what happened next. I must have blacked out. When I came to, I was lying in the front seat of my van. The engine was humming softly. The sun was just rising, and I was parked at a rest area I didn't recognize, somewhere near the Carolina border. Everything was clean. My gear was intact. The forest was gone, but the photo was still in my lap. Gracie and her kids smiling like nothing had ever gone wrong. And on the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were 4 words etched in pen. "Don't go back, ever." I drove without stopping for nearly 9 hours that day. I didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't even turn the radio on. Just miles of highway, the hum of the tires, and the rising panic inside me like a storm I couldn't outrun. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I had to put distance between myself and that place. Cades Hollow, the Whisper Corridor. Whatever name it wore, it had almost kept me. Eventually, I landed in a small RV park in Georgia, just outside of Macon. It was one of those quiet, family-run places with a general store, laundry hut, and rows of RVs that hadn't moved in years. Safe. Or at least safer than anywhere surrounded by unbroken forest. I paid for a week up front and parked Maple in the shade between a retired couple from Vermont and a school teacher from Louisiana. I didn't say much to anyone. At night, I sat inside my van with all the windows closed and the curtains drawn. Every time the wind picked up, I thought I heard my name again. Every crack of a branch or scurry of an animal set my heart pounding. I didn't sleep the first 2 nights. I don't think I even blinked. On the 3rd night, just as I was about to drift off from pure exhaustion, someone knocked on my door. 2 taps. Soft, polite. I froze. Every part of me tensed. It was happening again. I grabbed my flashlight, my knife, something I'd never had to use but always kept nearby, and opened the door slowly, hand trembling. It was the school teacher. His name was Marvin. "Hey," he said, holding out a can of bug spray. "You left this by the laundry earlier." I took it with a shaking hand. "Thanks." He didn't leave right away. "You okay?" he asked, peering around me into the darkened interior of my van. "You've looked spooked since you got here." I didn't answer. I couldn't. He nodded, like he understood more than he was letting on. "You saw something, didn't you?" That got my attention. I stepped outside, shut the door behind me. "What do you mean?" Marvin took a deep breath, looked toward the woods just past the edge of the RV park. "You ever heard of the missing 4-1 stuff? The disappearances in the national parks?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "Why?" "My cousin was one of them, back in '95. Disappeared without a trace in Shenandoah. Left his tent zipped up from the inside, shoes still there, GPS still working. Vanished. He was an experienced backpacker. Former Army. They never found him. Not a bone, not a thread. Just gone." He paused, then added, "There's places out there that ain't just wilderness. They're between something. You feel it when you're in them. Time gets weird. Space folds in on itself. People say it's magnetic anomalies or some geological crap, but I don't buy that." He looked at me. You were in one of those places, weren't you? I couldn't speak. My throat closed, but I nodded. He gave me a look of deep sympathy, then said something I'll never forget. They don't always let you leave, and when they do, you don't come back the same. That night, I finally slept, but my dreams were fractured and full of static. I kept seeing the ranger station, the trees, the Polaroid, and that voice, small, childlike, speaking in perfect mimicry, whispering names through bark and branches. When I woke up, the photo was gone. I tore the van apart looking for it. Top to bottom, every drawer, every book, every crack in the paneling, gone. In its place, tucked beneath my pillow, was something else. A slip of birch bark, curled at the edges with those same 4 words burned into it. Don't go back. Ever. I left the RV park that afternoon and headed west, driving aimlessly until I hit Texas. The desert air helped, the openness, the lack of trees. I stayed in places where I could see the horizon stretch for miles. No forests, no corridors, no hollow places in the land. But the silence still followed me. Months passed, seasons changed. I tried returning to normal life, got a short-term job in Santa Fe teaching kids how to build solar cookers, tried dating again, even went a couple weeks without thinking about that place. But then the knocking came back. Not often, maybe once every few weeks. Always late. Always just 1 or 2 soft taps on the side of the van or the motel wall. Sometimes on the window right beside my bed. Always followed by a silence so deep it made the blood in my ears roar. And sometimes, just sometimes, I'd wake to find new names carved into nearby wood, on a bench, a tree trunk, even a picnic table. Names I didn't recognize until I did. Last week, it was Marvin. I tried calling the RV park in Georgia. Disconnected number. I tried emailing. No reply. I searched the missing persons registries, and sure enough, Marvin M. Townsend, age 62, last seen July 7th, vanished from a campground outside Macon. No leads. No witnesses. Van was still locked. Wallet and keys inside. I didn't know what to do. I still don't. Because now I know it wasn't just the forest that heard me. It was them, whatever they are, and they've been following me. There's a moment you reach, not when the fear peaks, but when it settles, when it becomes a companion, a shape you carry, not one that chases you. I started feeling it somewhere outside of Taos, somewhere dry and flat, where the trees had thinned out and the stars stretched so wide overhead it felt like the sky might collapse on me. But even there, under those open skies, the feeling remained, that I was marked. Not in a supernatural sense, not like a curse in a movie. No, more like I had passed through something that left a thumbprint on my mind, a psychological scar. And sometimes scars itch. I started seeing things that didn't make sense. People I'd never met looking at me like they knew me. A man at a gas station in Winslow, Arizona, who shook my hand too hard and said, "You came back different." A woman behind the counter at a truck stop near Roswell who handed me my receipt and muttered, "You should have stayed with them." Little things, odd things, enough to make me wonder if the world was breaking or if I was. I tried telling myself I was just tired, paranoid, that the brain plays tricks when trauma's involved. But even my denial had a limit, and that limit came in the form of a second photograph. It arrived in the mail at a roadside RV park in New Mexico, forwarded to me by the owner of the Georgia place who had apparently reopened briefly before closing again. No return address. Just an envelope with my name in blocky letters. Inside was a Polaroid, different from the one I'd found before, but similar in feel. This time, it was a group of campers around a fire pit, 6 or 7 of them, maybe more, but the focus was blurred at the edges like it had been taken quickly or from a distance. In the middle was a man standing with his back to the camera. I stared at that photo for hours. It was me. No doubt. Same posture, same boots, same patched denim jacket I'd worn on the Smoky Mountain trip. But I hadn't taken that picture. I hadn't been in that picture. Not that I could remember. And worse, behind me, standing at the edge of the firelight, just where the trees started, was a shape. Tall, shadowed, like bark come to life, and just barely visible in the flash was the glint of something like eyes, far too high off the ground. Not reflecting, exactly. Absorbing. I turned the photo over. This one had no warning, just coordinates, latitude, longitude. I typed them into my GPS with hands that didn't feel like mine. The location was familiar, not Cade's Hollow, but close, a canyon south of it, unnamed. No trails, no markers. I should have thrown the photo away. I should have burned it. But I didn't, because some part of me, some fractured, rusted, half-ruined part, wanted to understand, to see it again, to prove to myself that it hadn't been a dream or a psychotic break. I left the desert behind. The trees welcomed me back like they were waiting. This time, I didn't stop at the usual campsites. I didn't look for ranger stations or trail maps. I drove straight toward the coordinates through back roads and washed out forest paths until Maple couldn't take it anymore. I parked her in a hollow of trees so thick the sky was barely more than a smudge of gray above. The silence was the same, that complete absence of life. No birds, no wind, no insects. Just the low, humming pressure in my ears that felt like something coiling beneath the ground. I took only what I needed: flashlight, water, knife, the photo, and started hiking. The deeper I went, the less the trail made sense. Trees doubled back, roots twisted across the path in new ways. My compass spun. At one point, I walked 10 minutes in a straight line and ended up behind Maple again. But I didn't turn back. I don't know how long I hiked. Hours? Days? Time stopped feeling like time. Eventually, I found the clearing. Not a campsite, not a ranger station, just an open space in the woods, perfectly round, the trees around it all leaning outward like something had pushed them from the center. The ground was flat, no grass, just scorched dirt and the faint smell of ozone like after lightning. In the center stood a cairn, stones stacked high, perfectly balanced, too precise to be natural. At the base of the cairn, another Polaroid. I picked it up with trembling fingers. This one was blank, no image, just a white square slowly turning brown from moisture. But when I turned it over, the back was different, not words this time. A name, mine, followed by a date, 2 weeks from now. I dropped it, staggered back, my breath ragged, my limbs cold. The wind picked up suddenly like the trees had exhaled, and in that exhale, a sound. Not a voice, not words, just a rhythm. Knock, from everywhere, from the trees, the ground, inside my own skull. Knock, knock. I ran. Branches tore at me, roots caught my ankles. The sky stayed gray no matter how far I went. And all the while, the knocking followed. When I finally stumbled back to Maple, bloodied and breathless, the door was already open. Inside, a fresh Polaroid sat on the dash. Me, standing outside the cairn, holding the blank photo. The timestamp, that morning. And scribbled on the bottom edge, in that same handwriting I'd never learned to recognize, "You're almost home." I should have left. Driven away without stopping, without looking back, without another thought to what I'd seen. But that's not what I did. Instead, I sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, heart thundering so loud I thought it might rattle the windshield. The trees around me weren't still anymore. They were breathing. That's the only way I can describe it. Like they were inhaling me, drawing me in inch by inch, my own weight pressing deeper into the seat like gravity was shifting. I turned the key. Nothing. Not a cough. Not a flicker of power. Just silence and the slow, expanding awareness that it had never let me leave in the first place. You can drive all you want in those mountains. You can see the sunrise, stop at gas stations, send postcards, change states. But if it wants you, you're still there. You never really left. You just dreamed that you did. The knocking came again. This time, it wasn't physical. It was inside me. A drum beat in the center of my chest, like something had found its rhythm in my heartbeat and was syncing with it. Knock, knock, pulse, knock, pulse. I opened the door, walked out without thinking, and stepped into the woods. I don't know how far I went or how long. Time was gone. Sound was gone. Thought was something I wore loosely, like a torn coat flapping behind me. Eventually, I reached a place that wasn't there. Not a clearing, not a canyon, not a landmark of any kind, just a distortion. Like the forest was holding its breath. And in that pocket of dead air, I saw them. Not people, not animals, shapes, shadows in the form of what we understand. Vague outlines that hinted at bodies but didn't obey the rules of them, like something ancient and formless had tried to wear human skin and failed. One stood taller than the rest. No face, no eyes, just bark where a skull might be, long limbs ending in branch-like fingers. And though it didn't speak, I understood. It didn't want to kill me. It wanted me to listen. Because the forest remembers. Every soul it takes, every step left unanswered, every voice that cries out in the dark, it doesn't forget. It holds them, wears them, becomes them. All those disappearances, the hundreds, the thousands, they're not gone. They're here, folded into the trees, echoing in the soil, whispers in the rustle of leaves that say names you've never told another living soul. They don't scream, they watch. They wait for you to return. And I did. The tall figure raised one arm, a slow, creaking motion like a dead limb in the wind. And all around me, the forest responded. Polaroids began to fall from the trees like leaves, hundreds of them, thousands. Photos of faces, families, campers, children, all of them real, all of them lost. And I saw mine among them. Not one photo, dozens, each taken from a different angle, different year, different me. It had been watching a long time. I dropped to my knees because this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about understanding, about being let in. The last thing I remember is the forest sighing. That sound when the wind runs through the canopy and it sounds like voices just out of reach, like memory, like mourning. Then darkness. And now here I am, telling you this story, not from a ranger station, not from a safe little RV park in the middle of nowhere, not even from the road, but from the in-between, because I never left. Not really. I walk in two worlds now, the one you know and the one underneath it. I send postcards that never arrive. I leave signs for people like you, whispers, knocks, Polaroids left in unexpected places, warnings, invitations, because someday you'll drive past that overgrown road. You'll see the mossy stone, Cade's Hollow, and you'll feel it, that little tug, that instinct you've learned to ignore. But don't, stop, listen, because if you do, you'll hear them, the trees whispering names. And maybe, just maybe, you'll hear mine. Story 5. It started with a silence. Not the kind you expect out in the high desert, where the wind is supposed to howl through the sandstone arches and whisper through the hoodoos like a lost language. No. This was too still. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own blood moving behind your ears. Bryce Canyon in October had always been one of those strange in-between places. Too late in the season for the crowds, too early for snow. My girlfriend Jess and I had taken the trip on a whim. We were both between jobs. Floating. A pair of ex-urbanites who had convinced ourselves that if we just got far enough from the noise of our lives, we'd figure out what came next. She had this old rust-colored Westphalia, a 79 model with a cracked skylight and a temperamental fridge. We'd been sleeping in it for 3 weeks by the time we reached Bryce. Our skins smelled like firewood and dry sweat. The kind of clean that only nature allows, where you stop noticing what you're missing. We pulled into Sunset Campground late in the day. The sun had already dipped behind the amphitheater rim, casting everything in this coppery glow that made the red rock look like it was still burning from the inside. The air was sharp, the temperature already slipping toward freezing. There were a few other vans scattered around, maybe 5 or 6, mostly solo campers or older couples. Everyone kept to themselves. That's the thing about places like Bryce. People come here to be left alone. It's peaceful, mostly, until it's not. That night, after we'd set up camp and eaten cold lentils with tortillas, we took a short walk along the edge of the canyon. The moon was bright, but the clouds kept brushing across it like drifting gauze. Down in the basin, the wind traced between the spires and narrow canyons, pulling soft moans out of the sandstone. It sounded like breath, rhythmic, in and out, alive. Jess stood still, looking out over the ledge. "You hear that?" I nodded. "The wind?" She hesitated, her mouth barely open. It said something. I half laughed, expecting her to smile. She didn't. It said my name. I squinted into the dark, trying to catch whatever she'd heard. The wind picked up again. It moved across the basin in waves, brushing the trees below us, bending them, then letting go. whispers if you wanted them to be, if you were listening for them. You're just tired, I said. The altitude's weird. Your ears play tricks. But I didn't believe it, not fully, because it had sounded like something to me, too. Not words, exactly, but a pattern. And patterns are dangerous. They tell your brain to listen harder. That night, we climbed into the van, zipped up inside sleeping bags, and left the back vents open to keep condensation off the windows. The desert gets dry in the day, but freezing at night. I remember thinking how clean the cold smelled, like dust and juniper and something sharp underneath. I woke up around 3 in the morning, not all at once, but in phases. First the cold on my face, then the creak of the van shifting in the wind, then the stillness again, like someone holding their breath outside. Then the voice. It wasn't loud, just a soft tone drifting in with the breeze. Muffled, but clear. David. It was my name. It came again. Carried through the vent. David. I sat up too quickly and hit my head on the roof of the van. Jess stirred beside me, groggy, half awake. Did you hear that? I whispered. She blinked, adjusting to the dark. What? I pressed my ear to the side panel, next to the open vent. The voice came again, faint but firm, dragged across the trees like static through a speaker. Then laughter, light, childlike. Then crying. It didn't make sense. None of it fit. The laughter was too high, too thin, like a recording played at the wrong speed. The crying didn't come from the same place. Deeper, closer. Someone's out there, I said, unzipping my bag. I think someone's calling. Jess grabbed my wrist. Don't open it. Her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. Not afraid, commanding. We need to check, I said. No. Her eyes were wide. Her pupils were huge, blown open like prey. If it knows you heard it, it keeps going. What are you talking about? But she just shook her head, whispering to herself. Not praying, not exactly. Just repeating something I couldn't quite hear. I lay back down, but I didn't sleep. I waited for the voice to come again. It didn't. By morning, the sun was strong enough to cast sharp, clean shadows across the gravel. Everything felt too bright. The fire pit had blown cold ash across the site. We didn't talk about the night. We packed up breakfast in silence. Jess avoided eye contact, her jaw clenched tight, chewing too long on every bite. I tried to write it off. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe we both had some kind of shared auditory hallucination. But that felt even worse than a voice in the wind. Because hallucinations come from inside. They mean something's broken. Something you can't see. We took a short hike down into the Navajo Loop, hoping the sunlight would clear our heads. The switchbacks were narrow, pressed between towering walls of orange and red rock that made it feel like you were walking into something ancient and buried. The kind of place sound doesn't escape from. It was quiet. Too quiet. Not peaceful. Smothered. Every once in a while, I thought I heard footsteps behind us, but when I turned, the trail was empty. The same silence pressed around us. My heartbeat felt loud in my ears. Jess kept glancing over her shoulder. When I asked her if she was okay, she just said, I don't think it likes that we heard it. We didn't stay out long, just enough to pretend everything was normal. When we got back to the van, there was a single pine cone placed on the front windshield. Centered. Perfectly balanced. I looked around the lot. No one in sight. No squirrels. No wind. It was still. The kind of still that makes you stop breathing just to hear if anything else is. Jess picked up the pine cone and held it in her hand. Then, quietly, she dropped it into the fire pit and walked away. That night, the voice came back. But this time it didn't call for me. It called for her. Jess didn't stir when it said her name. Not at first. Jessica. Drawn out. The syllables twisted and softened, almost tender, like a lullaby sung by someone who didn't quite know the words. I was already awake when it started. I hadn't really slept since the night before. My mind kept circling the same drain, too aware of every creak in the van's frame, every soft brush of wind against the fabric of the pop top. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just wind. Cold air funneling through broken trees and dead branches, the kind of sound your brain scrambles to make familiar, but there was nothing familiar about the way it said her name. Jessica. Laughter again, brittle and wrong, followed by a wet kind of sobbing, low and thick, like something choking on grief. Jess's breath caught beside me. She wasn't pretending anymore. "It's just the wind," I whispered, but I didn't believe it. Not anymore. She turned her head slowly toward me in the dark, her eyes wide open, her lips barely moved. "It's learning." Those two words stopped my thoughts cold. I didn't even know what to ask. Something about the way she said it, like she wasn't guessing, like she knew. "You've heard it before?" I said. Silence. Then, quietly, "Not here." I sat up, heart starting to pound in my chest. "What does that mean?" Jess didn't answer. Outside, the voice had stopped calling her name, but it hadn't left. I could feel it, like pressure in the air. You know how you can tell when someone's staring at you, even through a crowd? That's what it felt like, a gaze without eyes. Focused. Intent. I reached over and pulled the vent shut. The metal clicked softly. For a moment, the sound seemed to recede. Then, 3 soft knocks, right outside the van door. Rhythmic. Human. Knock, knock, knock. We both froze, the kind of stillness where even breathing feels too loud. There was no flashlight, no shuffling footsteps, no voice asking for help or directions. Just 3 slow, deliberate taps, as though whatever was out there wanted us to know it could knock like we did. I could feel Jess holding her breath beside me, stiff as stone. "Don't answer it," she said. "I'm not." She closed her eyes, whispering again, that same string of quiet syllables. Her fingers trembled inside the sleeping bag. "I think we need to leave," I said, but she didn't answer. By the time morning came, the knocking had stopped. The voice hadn't returned. Just the wind again, moving low through the trees, carrying loose dirt across the gravel in small spirals. But the van was different. The door on the driver's side was ajar, only by an inch or two. Not enough to trigger the light, not enough to make a sound. But it hadn't been that way when we went to sleep. I checked it twice before zipping myself into the bag. We'd made that a rule since the first night in Arizona when a wild dog nosed its way too close to the cooler. Jess stared at the door for a long time. Then she stepped outside, scanned the area, and got back in without saying a word. We didn't talk while we packed. It was like we were both afraid of saying something that would confirm what we'd felt, that something had been inside. We drove east toward Kodachrome Basin, trying to put space between us and whatever was happening at Bryce. The road wound through canyons and open scrublands, past cattle fences and rusted signs, half swallowed by time. The sky was too big. I couldn't stop thinking about how much space there was for sound to travel out here, how far a voice could go if the wind decided to carry it. By midday, we pulled into a tiny dirt pull-off, surrounded by tall, dry grass. No other campers, no formal sights, just a stretch of pale earth and brittle junipers under a flat blue sky. I tried to laugh about it. "At least we'll sleep." Jess looked at me. Her eyes were red. "It doesn't care where we go." And she was right. That night, even in that new place, it came back. This time, it didn't say a name. It just whispered. It sounded like dozens of voices stacked on top of each other, some high, some low, some cracking in half like broken speakers. They repeated the same few words again and again, blending into a rhythm that wrapped around the van like a snake. "We saw you. We saw you. We saw you." Laughter. Then silence. Then, "Come back." It said that part in my voice, not exactly, but close enough that my chest locked up. I wanted to scream, to throw the doors open and shout into the desert, but something in me knew that's what it wanted. It didn't want to be ignored. It wanted to be acknowledged. That was the trap. The next morning, Jess handed me a cup of coffee with shaking fingers. We sat in silence for nearly an hour, watching the sun move over the ridge. "I heard it again," I said finally. She nodded. "I don't think we're dreaming." Her voice cracked on that last word. Dreaming. Like she still wanted to believe it was possible. That we could explain it all away with science, stress, something psychological. I thought about calling someone, the ranger station, park services, anyone. But what would I even say? Hey, there's something in the wind that's mimicking us, that's stalking us. We'd sound like lunatics. We decided to head back into town. Panguitch was the closest, a small place with maybe 2 motels, a diner, and spotty cell signal. I just wanted to be around walls again, around people, around things that didn't echo. But even in the van, miles from the canyon with the windows up and the radio on low, I kept hearing something behind the music, a sound that wasn't supposed to be there. Static, maybe, or breathing. It followed us to the motel. Panguitch sat quiet beneath a layer of dust and sun-bleached signs, the kind of town that looks like it never fully woke up from the 1950s. We checked into a low-slung, one-story place that smelled like pine cleaner and cigarette ghosts. The woman at the front desk barely looked at us, just slid the key across the counter with a nod and mumbled something about parking around back. Room 7. 2 beds, 1 TV, a window unit that wheezed like it had asthma. Jess threw our bags onto the first mattress and immediately locked the door, checked it twice. Then she closed the curtains like she was bracing for something to strike the glass. "I just need one night," she said. "One night without it." I didn't argue. I didn't say I agreed, but I didn't think we were going to get it either. After a hot shower and some fast food, we laid on the beds in silence. The TV was on, volume low. Some old rerun with canned laughter that felt stranger than the quiet. Sometime after midnight, I woke up needing water. The air in the room had gone thick, like the AC had stopped working. My mouth was dry, my skin sticky with sweat. I sat up and turned toward the small mini fridge where we'd stashed a bottle earlier. But I stopped when I saw the TV. It was off. We hadn't turned it off. And in the black reflection of the screen, I saw something move behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, half expecting to see someone standing in the doorway. Nothing. Just Jess, still asleep. The room silent except for the low, grinding hum of the old air conditioner. The fridge clicked softly, then quieted. I went to the window, pressed my fingers against the curtain. Something was outside, not visible, not clear. Just the sense of it. That pressure again. That feeling like the silence itself was leaning in, crowding the space, like something was trying to listen through the walls. I backed away from the glass. "Don't open it," Jess mumbled. Her eyes were still closed. Dreaming or not? I went back to bed without water. The voice came at 2:43 a.m. I know because I was watching the red numbers on the alarm clock, waiting for something I couldn't name. I'd felt it building again. That tension just beneath the floorboards of the world. The voice didn't come from outside this time. It came from the wall vent. Soft, close, wet. It whispered my name, and then it said things it shouldn't have known. "You saw her at the trailhead, the girl with the red jacket. You thought about her. She smiled at you. You didn't tell Jess." My stomach turned to lead, because that had happened a week ago at Zion. I hadn't thought about it since. I hadn't told anyone. The voice kept going. "You almost turned around. You thought about what it would be like to leave, didn't you?" I turned toward the vent, whispering, "What do you want?" The air went still. Then, "I want you to listen." Then laughter again. But this time it wasn't mocking. It was joyous, triumphant, like it had gotten exactly what it wanted. Jess sat up then, suddenly, her whole body rigid. She clutched her forehead like something was pressing into it. "It's too loud," she said. "It's in my head." I pulled her to me, but she fought it, breathing fast, her skin ice cold. She pushed away and stood, pacing the tiny motel room, barefoot, back and forth, hands pressed tight to her temples. "It's not outside anymore. It's not outside. Jess," I said gently. She turned to me, eyes wild. "I think it's repeating us. I think it's recording." That word hit hard. Recording. Not just copying. Repeating. Learning, like a child parroting phrases until they fit the shape of a conversation, and was using our names. Jess sat on the edge of the bed, like rocking slightly, her breathing uneven. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "It mimicked my mom once, back in Flagstaff, years ago. I didn't know it wasn't her until she tried to get me to go outside at night." I stared at her. "You've known about this all along?" She nodded. Shame all over her face. "I thought it went away. It usually does. If I don't acknowledge it. If I move. You should have told me." I didn't want you to hear it. The way she said that stuck with me. Like hearing it made it real. Like the voice only needed a single listener to open something that shouldn't be opened. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. We left Panguitch the next morning. No destination, just away. We didn't talk as we drove. Jess stared out the window. I kept one hand on the wheel, one eye on the mirrors. But even the silence felt wrong. Too familiar. Too much like them. Every now and then, the wind would catch the edge of the van just right. And I'd swear I could hear it again. That soft laughter, that rhythm of syllables forming our names, that breathing that didn't belong to either of us. And something else, too. A phrase that repeated low beneath it all, just loud enough for me to hear if I stopped trying to. You're getting closer. But closer to what? That was the part I hadn't figured out yet. That was the part that terrified me most. We drove until the road turned into nothing. No more signs. No more gas stations or ranger kiosks or even fences. Just a long, pale dirt stretch that ran between low hills where the grass had dried into brittle bones and the sky felt too big to be real. Jess didn't ask where we were going. I didn't tell her. I just kept pushing the van forward, letting the dust cloud behind us thicken like maybe we could outrun it. The voice hadn't returned since Panguitch. But that didn't mean it was gone. It was waiting. Listening. The farther we got from anything resembling civilization, the more I felt it watching. Not from outside the van, not from the mirrors or the hills, but from inside the spaces between our thoughts. Like it had crawled into the cracks while we were asleep and nested there, patient and silent. We stopped near a cluster of low sandstone ridges, tucked behind what used to be a fire road. No markers. No other vehicles, just sagebrush and the distant shimmer of heat rising off the rock. Jess stepped out, stretched, and looked at the empty sky like it might give her an answer. I don't think this helps, she said. It's all I can think to do. We set up camp like we had before, opened the pop top, pulled out the folding chairs, made a fire out of dry wood we found scattered nearby. I watched her the way you watch someone who might vanish at any second. Her movements were slower, measured, as though something inside her was trying not to surface. Later that night, she stared into the flames for a long time, then asked quietly, "Do you ever wonder if maybe it was always there and we just didn't hear it until now?" I looked at her, but she didn't meet my eyes. I mean, she continued, what if the voice isn't a visitor? What if it's part of this place? Part of us? I didn't know what to say. The fire crackled softly. A gust of wind moved through the ridge behind us. Soft, subtle. Then the sound changed. It wasn't like the other nights. It wasn't calling us, not at first. It was mimicking us. Our voices. Exactly. Small phrases, fragments from conversations we'd had inside the van. Things we'd said days ago, weeks ago. We'll be fine. You're just tired. Don't open it. Jess stood up, eyes locked on the ridge, her body trembling. The voice came again. Jessica. Then mine. David. Shh. Then both names together, like a breathless whisper trying to pull us forward. I stepped in front of her, but she didn't move. The fire hissed. The wind picked up. Sand swirled around our ankles like it wanted to bury us. I can't do this again, she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. Like a dam breaking. I thought it would stop when I left Arizona, but it didn't. It just followed slower. You said it usually goes away. It does, when it finds someone new. The way she said that, soft, hopeless, it settled in my gut like a stone. We didn't sleep that night. We sat with our backs to the van, staring into the dark, waiting for it to speak again. But it didn't. It just listened. And in that silence, I started to hear it again. Not with my ears. Not with sound, but like a memory coming back out of order. I remembered being a kid, camping in Utah with my parents, a cheap tent, a night when the wind moved strange through the trees. I'd sworn I heard my mom calling me from outside the tent, but she'd been asleep next to me the whole time. I remembered freezing, too scared to answer. The voice kept calling, my name, over and over. I never told anyone. Until now, I hadn't remembered it at all, like something had let me forget. I turned to Jess. I think we've heard it before, not just this week, years ago, maybe always. She didn't respond, but her eyes said she knew. She'd always known. In the morning, we found something hanging from the antenna of the van. A ribbon, faded red, tied in a bow. Jess stared at it for a long time before she said, "My mom used to tie these in my hair when I was little. I haven't seen one since she died." We didn't talk about it. We just packed. There was nowhere left to run, but we tried anyway. We drove west through towns that felt thinner than before, as if the people had been scraped out and only the buildings remained. That night, we stopped outside a town called Escalante, parked near a dried-up riverbed and made a small fire, not because we needed heat, but because the silence had grown too thick. We sat close together. We didn't say much until I asked, "What do you think it wants?" Jess didn't answer right away. Then she looked at me and said, "It wants to be heard. And once it is, it becomes you." That word lodged in my brain. Becomes, not follows, not haunts, not attacks, becomes. As we sat in that thinning darkness, the air began to change again. Soft wind at first, then familiar voices, mine, hers, slightly off, slurred like sleep talk, and then the sound of us laughing, not from any memory I had, not from anything real, a version of us we hadn't lived. I felt my chest lock up. It wasn't repeating us anymore. It was replacing us. We left before the sun rose, didn't pack the chairs, didn't fold the bedding. We just slammed the van doors and drove. Headlights cutting through the fog that hadn't been there the night before. Jess didn't speak. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes fixed ahead, barely blinking. The sound of gravel under the tires was the only thing keeping me grounded. That and the feeling in my stomach, the one that told me whatever was behind us wasn't staying behind. We didn't have a plan. No destination, just forward. We reached a small rest area around mid-morning, somewhere between Boulder and Capitol Reef. Empty parking lot, a single picnic table under a warped pine tree. I killed the engine and waited for silence, but the silence was wrong again. Too full, like something else was breathing with us. Jess climbed out, lit a cigarette with shaking hands. She didn't smoke, not before this trip, not since I'd known her. But now she smoked like it was keeping something at bay. I joined her at the table, trying to pretend that the air didn't taste metallic, that the wind wasn't threading through the trees with voices riding just beneath it. We sat without speaking. Then she asked me, "Do you remember the night I told you my mom died?" I nodded. Flagstaff. We were parked under that billboard. She looked away. "That night, I didn't tell you everything." Her voice broke on the last word. "She died in the backyard. During a storm. I was inside on the phone. I kept hearing her call my name, but it didn't sound right. Too close, like she was speaking through the walls. I opened the door and walked into the yard." Jess paused, swallowed. She wasn't there. The wind was going nuts, trees bending sideways, but her voice was clear, soft, and it kept calling me deeper into the yard. I followed it, almost to the fence line. Then I saw her. Her eyes glossed over, staring into something far away. She was just standing there, still, not moving, no expression, and she said my name again, same tone, same cadence, but her mouth didn't move. I felt my hands tighten. I turned around, ran back inside, locked the doors. The storm kept going. Next morning, we found her body on the other side of the fence, like she'd been dropped there. She looked at me then, not for comfort, but for confirmation. Like she needed to know if I believed her, if someone else had seen beneath the skin of the world the way she had. I didn't speak. I just nodded, because I had seen it, not then, not like that. But I understood. It wasn't haunting us. It was copying us, wearing us. It had spoken in my voice, my words, but it was always off by just enough to make you question yourself, make you feel like you were losing your grip. Later that day, as we climbed through the switchbacks past Escalante, the radio turned itself on. We hadn't touched it in days. The volume was low, static at first, then a voice, Jess's, saying something I knew she had never said to me. "David, we should stop running. It's safe here." She looked at me, horrified. I didn't say that. I killed the radio. We drove in silence for miles, but something had shifted. It wasn't just in the wind anymore. It was in the wires. The van's electronics flickered. The dash lights pulsed like a heartbeat. The static from the radio didn't go silent when I shut it off. It hid. It waited. That night, we stayed at an abandoned gas station off a forgotten stretch of highway. The pumps were rusted, the windows busted out, no power, no cell signal, nothing. We pulled the van around back and parked between two large dumpsters, thinking maybe the concrete would muffle the sound. It didn't. The moment we lay down, the laughter began again, but not outside. Inside the van. Not from the vent. Not from the windows, from the tiny speaker near the dome light. It clicked on by itself. The van wasn't even running. And through it came a recording of our own conversation from earlier that day. Us talking about leaving Bryce, word for word. Then it glitched, and Jess's voice said something she'd never said. Let me in. Over and over, twisting, stretching, like the words had bones and they were being broken. Let me in, let me in, let me in. I ripped the battery cable loose in a panic, plunging the van into silence. Jess sat with her hands over her ears, rocking slightly. It's not trying to scare us anymore, she said. What is it trying to do? Her voice came out small. Get inside. The air smelled different after that. Not dirt, not juniper. Something else, like ozone. Or rot. We didn't sleep. We just sat in the dark until the sky paled into morning. No laughter that day. No voices. But we knew better than to trust the quiet. Because now it didn't need to follow us. It was already with us. And worse, it was starting to sound more like us than we did. We left the gas station with the feeling that we'd taken something with us. Not a voice, not a presence, not exactly. More like a version, a duplicate. Something that had watched and recorded and studied us long enough to build its own facsimile. And now it was inside the van, inside the space with us. I could feel it in the way the air moved when neither of us spoke. I could hear it in the silence between sentences, like it was waiting for its turn to talk. Jess didn't want to go south, but I did. Something in me, some part that still believed in maps and borders, thought maybe if we crossed state lines, it would matter. Like whatever this thing was, maybe it was tied to the land, the canyons, the rocks. But that's not how it worked. We hit the edge of Arizona by noon, near a ghost town called Perea. Nothing but busted wood frames and a wind that howled even when the trees didn't move. We parked just outside a cattle gate and climbed a low ridge to look back at the road. The van looked small from up there, too small to hold what I knew it held. Jess stood with her arms wrapped around her ribs like she was trying to hold herself in place. She said, "You remember what it said in the motel? You're getting closer." I nodded. She didn't turn around. What if it didn't mean to it? What if it meant to ourselves? That thought burrowed into me deeper than I wanted to admit. Because something had changed. Not just in the van, not just in her. In me. I'd started hearing things in my own voice even when I wasn't speaking. Thoughts that didn't feel entirely mine. Flashes of memories that didn't line up. A feeling like I was watching myself from behind my own eyes. Like someone else was learning how to be me. We kept moving. That night, somewhere outside Marble Canyon, we stopped at a primitive campsite wedged between two cliffs. No one else around, no lights, no wind, dead still. Jess didn't want to build a fire. It watches fire, she said. It waits for it to die. So we sat in the dark with the doors locked, the windows cracked just enough to let air in. We didn't speak. At some point in the early hours, the temperature dropped. Inside the van, it felt like it always did, dry, silent, pressed in from all sides. But I could see my breath. Jess sat up slowly, staring into the empty air like it was whispering to her. Then she said it. "It's already inside you." I didn't move. My hands went numb. "What are you talking about?" "It spoke in your voice last night, when you were asleep. I tried to wake you up and you said something, but your mouth didn't move. It was wrong." I shook my head. "I didn't say anything." "That's the point," she whispered. "It's using you." The panic that hit me then wasn't fear. It was doubt. The worst kind. The kind that makes you question your own thoughts. Because I couldn't be sure. I'd had dreams lately, vivid ones, dreams where I was talking to her, holding her hand, smiling, but her eyes were empty and I wasn't sure what we were talking about. Dreams that felt like rehearsals for something else, something I wasn't in control of. And now she was looking at me like I wasn't me anymore. I looked back, trying to find something familiar in her expression, but all I saw was distance. Then she said softly, "Say something only you would say." "What?" "I need to hear it. Something you've never told me. Something real." I hesitated. The silence stretched, and in that moment, I realized I couldn't think of anything. Not because I didn't have secrets, I did, but because I didn't trust that whatever I said wouldn't sound like it was scripted, like the thing inside me would use it later. She turned away, didn't cry, didn't yell, just sat there, hugging her knees, rocking slightly. Then the van radio came on. We hadn't touched it. Static first, then our voices, one after the other. "Say something only you would say." I didn't say anything. "It's using you." And underneath that, the sound of footsteps crunching gravel. Approaching. We both turned at the same time. The side window was fogged up, but something moved past it. A shape, a silhouette. It didn't knock. It just circled, slowly. Jess crawled toward the front and grabbed the keys from the dash. Her hands were trembling. She didn't say anything. Just started the van, headlights cutting through the darkness. There was nothing out there. No tracks, no figure. Just open desert and low cliffs and that feeling like we were being followed from the inside out. We drove until we saw light. A diner. One of those 24-hour places that look the same no matter where you are in the country. Fluorescent, sterile, empty. We parked crooked in the lot and stumbled inside like survivors of something we couldn't name. The waitress poured us coffee without a word, just a look. One of those long, knowing looks you only get from people who've seen things too strange to name. I sat across from Jess, staring at the black surface of my cup. My reflection blinked back at me, and then it smiled. I hadn't. Jess saw it too. She stood so fast her chair fell over. Her voice cracked in the middle of a whisper. "It's inside the reflection now." And I knew we weren't running from the voice anymore. We were running from ourselves, from versions of us that weren't us, but looked just close enough to get it almost right. And they were gaining. We didn't speak again until we were back on the road. I drove. Jess stared out the window, not looking at anything, just through it. Like if she focused too long, she might see herself out there, walking the shoulder of the highway. Another version. Another copy. The sun was rising and everything was gold and empty. That ghostly kind of light that makes the desert look ancient, like it's been holding its breath for 1,000 years. The diner was behind us. So was the thing in the reflection, but I still saw it in the rearview mirror, just for a second, a glimpse of my own eyes looking back at me, wide open and smiling. And I wasn't smiling. I almost drove off the road. Jess didn't react, didn't even flinch. She just said, "We need to find the echo chamber." I thought she was losing it. The what? That's what my mom used to call it, before everything got bad. When I was a kid, she'd tell me stories about the canyon winds, said some parts of the desert didn't just reflect sound, they remembered it. They held on to words, names, voices, played them back when the time was right. She finally looked at me. "That's what this is. It's not a ghost, David. It's not some monster crawling through the trees. It's recorded us. It's repeating us, becoming us." The words sunk in like water soaking into cracked stone, not haunting, not chasing, replaying. "Where's the chamber?" I asked. "I don't know if it's one place, but if we get back to where it started, Bryce, maybe we can stop it. Maybe it needs to stay near where it first hurt us." The thought of going back made my stomach twist, but I didn't say no because the voice had been getting stronger the farther we ran. Maybe, just maybe, facing it would break the loop. We turned around near Kanab, headed north. Every hour, the world felt less like the one I knew. Road signs that didn't match the map. Gas stations that looked newer than they should have. Towns with the same name listed twice, and once, just outside of Hatch, we passed a red VW van exactly like ours parked beside the road. Same scratches, same dented bumper, same faded sticker peeling off the back window. No one inside. Jess didn't even blink. She just whispered, "It's making new versions." When we finally reached Bryce, the air felt heavy, like stepping underwater. The trees were too still. The wind didn't move like before. It was waiting for us. We parked in the same spot at Sunset Campground, same lot, same slope, same broken fire ring, but our old tire tracks were already there, in the dirt, days old. That shouldn't have been possible. Jess stepped out first, looked up at the canyon rim, eyes scanning the tree line. "Listen." I held my breath. The wind moved, and then it spoke. "We remember you." But not just as a whisper, as a chorus. Our voices. Not just me and Jess, but other versions, some younger, some older, dozens of them, overlapping like threads in a tapestry, all saying things we had said before, things we hadn't yet said, things we might never say. And then, above it all, return. Jess grabbed my arm. "We need to go into the canyon, into the amphitheater." My legs resisted. Every instinct told me to run. But I followed her down the path, the same one we walked that first night. The switchbacks dropped quickly, the red rock walls closing in around us. The sound got thicker the lower we went, like the canyon itself was filled with voices, not bouncing off the walls, spoken by them. Every few steps, we heard them. "Don't open it. It's using you. Let me in." Then laughter, then crying, then static. Jess slowed at a bend where the walls narrowed, a natural alcove, her breath caught. There. I followed her gaze. The rock face ahead of us wasn't like the others. It was smooth, worn down not by water or wind, but by sound. A wide, crescent-shaped wall that almost looked like a stage, like a speaker. And the voices were loudest here, all our words, spoken back to us, over and over. Jess stepped forward, arms out slightly like she was approaching a wild animal. "It's a mirror," she said. "Not for light, for sound and memory." Then softly, "I think if we speak into it ourselves, it might let go." I didn't understand. "Speak what?" "Something real, something that only we know, that it can't copy." Her eyes welled up. "It can't make new memories, just steals the ones we've already made." I looked at the stone, at the shape of it, the way the wind moved through like it had been taught to breathe. I stepped forward, and I said something I had never told anyone. Not Jess, not anyone. A memory so personal, so buried, I felt it tear a hole open as I said it. I said it twice, louder the second time. Then Jess stepped forward, did the same. Her voice cracked halfway through, but she said it. And then silence. Not wind, not breath, not echoes, just stillness, like the canyon itself had inhaled and was holding it. Then, the first time in days, the air felt normal, heavy with gravity, not with presence. I turned to Jess. She was shaking, but smiling. Then the silence broke. Behind us, a footstep. We turned. Standing at the edge of the path was us. Not exactly. Our shapes, our clothes. But the way they stood was wrong. The angles of their arms, the timing of their breath, they didn't speak. They just stood, watching. And then, at the exact same moment, they smiled. We didn't move. Neither did they. The copies, if that's what they were, stood at the edge of the bend, bathed in canyon shadow. The light hit them just wrong. Too soft on their faces, too sharp on their clothes. Their smiles were small, polite. Like they didn't understand what smiling meant, just that it was something we did in moments like this. Jess whispered, "They didn't leave." I nodded, but my body felt locked, like my legs belonged to someone else now. Every nerve in me screamed to turn and run, but a deeper part of me, a more ancient part, knew it wouldn't matter. They would still be behind us. They always had been. The air shifted, not with wind, but with something heavier, like pressure. The version of me took a step forward. The movement was slow, precise, not threatening, not yet, but not human either. Jess gripped my arm. Then her copy stepped forward too. Just once. Perfect symmetry. They were watching us like they were waiting for permission. And something in me understood. They couldn't move until we did. Couldn't act until we gave them something to mimic. That was the rule. They needed precedent. I leaned toward Jess, barely a whisper. "We're not going to run." She gave a tight nod, but her eyes were wide. Not with panic. Worse. Recognition. I don't think they were ever meant to replace us, she said. What then? She looked at me. I think they were meant to follow, but we let them get too close. Behind us, the canyon mouth began to echo again. Soft murmurs at first. Our names. But this time not whispered, chanted like a warning or a ritual. I took Jess's hand and slowly backed away from the stone alcove, keeping my eyes on the doubles. They didn't move, just turned their heads slightly to track us, like puppets with invisible strings waiting for the next cue. We climbed out of the amphitheater just as the sun broke above the rim. Light spilled across the dirt in long, hot beams that turned the spires blood red. The voices quieted. By the time we reached the van, the air felt normal again, but I still checked every shadow, every mirror, every reflection in the windows. The duplicates never followed us out. We drove without speaking. The tires hummed against the road like a low, constant warning. When we stopped at a gas station 2 hours later, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, watched myself blink. Then I asked the question I hadn't dared ask out loud. Jess, how do you know I'm still me? She paused, one hand on the door. Then she looked at me with tears in her eyes. You stopped smiling when it did. That night, we found a motel in a town so small it didn't have a name on the map. Just a vacancy sign with 2 flickering bulbs and a key taped to the office door. We didn't ask questions, didn't want answers. I locked the door, pulled the curtains, checked every vent, every plug, every mirror. And for the first time in days, we slept. No voices, no wind, no echoes, just the weight of our own breathing. But sometime near dawn, I woke up gasping, not from a dream, from a sound I hadn't heard before, something new, not a whisper, not laughter, not even my own name, just one word spoken in Jess's voice, but not her tone, almost. I looked over. Jess was still asleep, face turned away, breathing soft. But as I sat there frozen, I watched something impossible happen. Her mouth moved, just barely. And in my voice, my exact voice, it said, "We're getting so close." Then she smiled, just for a second, just long enough for me to know it had never left. It had just learned how to wait. The next morning, Jess didn't remember saying anything. Didn't remember the smile, didn't feel strange or different, but something about her was lighter. Like something had been released inside her, or replaced. I couldn't tell which. She made coffee in the motel kitchenette, humming under her breath. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her back, watching for something, anything that would confirm what I'd heard, what I'd seen. But the hum wasn't hers. Not really. It was a pattern, a loop. She repeated the same 8 or 9 notes over and over without variation. The kind of mechanical rhythm you don't notice unless you're looking for it. I said, "You doing okay?" She turned to me, coffee in hand, bright-eyed. "Yeah, better actually." No pause, no thought, just better. She didn't ask how I was. I took the mug. My hand shook a little as I sipped it. It tasted fine. Normal, but now even normal felt like a lie. We left that motel by 9. I told her we needed to get away from the parks. No more nature, no more red rock, just city. Lights, noise, something artificial to break the pattern. She didn't argue. She didn't say much at all. Halfway to Vegas, I stopped the van at a lonely pullout overlooking a dry riverbed. The sun was overhead, the sky wide and white-blue. No sound but the engine ticking as it cooled. I asked her, "What's the last thing you remember from last night?" She blinked. Going to sleep. Nothing else? A beat. Bad dreams, maybe. Why? I watched her mouth, the way she said maybe. It wasn't the word. It was the rhythm. Too even. Too deliberate. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her and shake the wind out of her lungs, force it to show itself. But I didn't, because part of me wasn't sure anymore if I was still real. If the version of me asking the questions wasn't just another layer in the loop. Maybe that's how it ends, not with a scream or a vanishing, but with doubt so deep it rewrites your memories, your choices, your past. We made it to Vegas that night, bright lights, neon noise, thousands of people and voices that weren't ours. I thought we might be safe, but in the hotel bathroom with the shower running, I saw a shape behind the steam. Not a figure, a gesture, someone brushing their teeth. Right hand raised, slow, back and forth motion. but Jess was asleep in bed, and my hands were at my sides. I pulled the curtain back fast, no one there, but on the mirror, written in the condensation, "You speak. We follow." I didn't tell Jess. I couldn't. That night, I slept with the bathroom light on. In the days that followed, we stayed on the move. Different cities, new motels, big stores, crowds. We never talked about what happened, but we both knew we were just trying to outrun something that didn't need to chase us anymore. Because it had already learned the rhythm of our lives, the cadence of our love, the way we argued, the way we forgave each other, the sounds of our laughter, our cries, our silences. And every once in a while, in the dead static of early morning, I'll hear it in the hum of the refrigerator, or the whir of a ceiling fan, or the wind outside our hotel, a voice. My voice. Hers. Together, saying something I haven't said yet, but no, I will. And when I hear it, when the voice speaks a sentence I haven't lived through yet, I remember what the canyon told us in all those overlapping tongues. The desert echoes, but not always in the direction you expect. We were warned. We just didn't understand. Not then. Not until it was too late. Because once the wind learns your name, it never stops calling. It just waits for you to answer.